Good evening. This is the Select Board meeting of Wednesday, October 27th, 2021. This meeting is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed by the governor on June 16th, 2021. This meeting is being recorded by Milton Access Television and broadcast live. Would everyone please join the board for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
United States of America,
Republic,
to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
under God, indivisible,
with
with
liberty
and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. We're starting this evening's meeting with a sad news that Dave Evans, an employee of the town in the Department of Public Works, the town mechanic, passed away on Monday. And we'll have a moment of silence after we give Mr. Dennehy and any member of the board who would like to an opportunity to say a few words about Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, very sad day for the town of Milton. Dave was one of my first hires in the town of Milton. When I came to the town in November of 16, there was a town meeting article that had already been drafted for the town to hire a mechanic. The idea was to try to upgrade the services we have on the equipment that we had down throughout the town, both from fire engines to any piece of equipment or a sedan or anything that's driven around town. So we did perform a very extensive search, and Dave was head and shoulders above everyone that came through the door. It was a pleasure to work with Dave. Always had a smile on his face. I think the word down at DPW is he'd give you half a sandwich any day. He's one of those guys. So he's done a wonderful job for our town, and there's some very big shoes to fill, but very, very sad. And our thoughts and prayers go out to his family. So to know Dave is to love him, and may he rest in eternal peace. Thank you for all you did for the town of Milton, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Dennehy. If anyone else on the board would like to say a few words, please feel free. If not, we will just extend our condolences to Dave Evans' wife and his two sons.
Big loss for our town, big loss.
Yes, an important post in the DPW. Let his family know that we're thinking about him and them at this very difficult time. So we'll now have a moment of silence for Dave Evans of the Department of Public Works. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, the next item on our agenda is public comment. And I'll ask for anyone who would like to speak at public comment to signify by raising your hand. We're in a different format than our normal webinar format this evening, so everyone should remain muted until you're called upon. The rules for public format are that we set aside about 15 minutes for this section of the meeting, and we'll limit everyone to 3 minutes. There may be a fair number of people who would like to speak, so I will ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes. And if we end up having a lot of people saying the same thing, we'll ask that you consider whether you really need to make your comment. We are going to try to limit to 15 minutes because we have a fair number of items. Looks like a shorter agenda than it normally does. We have some items that may take some time for discussion this evening. So is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment tonight? I'll give a few seconds for anyone to raise their hands. Okay, I see Judy Gunderson and Jim Coyle. We'll start. I believe Ms. Gunderson may have been first. So Ms. Gunderson, please unmute and please state your name and your address for the record.
Judith Gunderson, 32 Woodchester Drive in Milton.
Thank you. Thank you. We can hear you. Thank you. Please proceed.
I am speaking to address the concerns that we heard at the October 19th open community meeting on 4R. When we showed people the letters of July 9th from Tom Doherty and the October 1st letters from the Select Board to Massport and also to Representative Lynch, those letters all advocate for, quote, 4 alternative paths, unquote. But 3 of those 4 paths were directed to neighboring Quincy, Braintree, and Hingham, and were rejected by those 3 towns in very decisive letters back to Milton. That leaves, by default, number 4, which is the 4R 15-degree dispersal path over East Milton. People were surprised and in some cases outraged. They simply could not comprehend why East Milton should get another airplane arrival path. Frankly, we could not supply an answer. And further reading the statement that on the October 13th Select Board meeting from Mr. Zulus that, quote, "We never said that," unquote, and Ms. Conlon's agreeing, they were further surprised. We have no need to supply, as Mr. Zulus has said, misinformation, misleading, half-truths, or mistruths as were stated at the October 25th meeting, because it's not in our interest to do such a thing. We are merely the conduit through which to ask for clarity. Mr. Zulus asked if you need to issue a written statement. You do, to clarify this apparent misinformation. In addition, last week we spoke with Massport, who confirmed that is exactly what you asked for, quote, "a second path over East Milton," but one day later called back to say that that isn't what the stakeholders want. If you are the stakeholders, then a written statement to clarify the question of advocating for another East Milton path is surely the only way to fix which is now of great concern to residents. Even if it is used in a rotation path with existing 4R, your proposal of the 4R 15-degree dispersal path merely moves planes over East Milton in a concentration that ranges in a width from a mere 900 feet near the expressway at the golf course to 0.65 miles wide at Cunningham Park in East Milton. There is no dispersal here. The Select Board is not the victim here, nor do we seek to paint you as the bad guys. It is the residents who are victimized by the incessant noise of the current system, and the Select Board has been mistakenly painted into a corner by the limits of misguided advice. Again, a clarifying written statement is the only right thing to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gunderson. Mr. Coyle, you are next. Would you please unmute and please state your name and address for the record?
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Jim Coyle. I live on Bumpton Street and a town meeting member, precinct 7. I'm calling to speak in behalf of myself and the East Milton Neighborhood Association. We've been meeting via phone calls and texts during the week here now, sharing additional thoughts for us. And we are in the process of preparing some public safety related comments for the 440 Granite Avenue project, including looking at other projects by the applicant, Michael Moore, some projects that we really like, and perhaps adapting some of the features in those projects for the 440 Granite Avenue project. Once we've had a few more days to communicate with each other, which is certainly difficult in these days, we will present our comments to the people on the members of the planning board, which I believe is the correct procedure. So that's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Coyle. And let me clarify for anyone who's here, if you are here to address 440 Granite Avenue, this would be the time to raise your hand and speak during public comment, because we do not have 440 Granite on for a public hearing. This is a discussion among the board under item 5 on the agenda. So if there is anyone else who would like to address the Board of Citizens speak on this issue or on another issue, 440 Granite Ave or any other issue, we'll wait a couple more seconds and please feel free to raise your hand. If not, we will move on. Okay, seeing no other hands raised. Thank you very much. We will move to item 4, which is on for discussion and approval of re-precincting new town voting precincts. And we're joined by town clerk, Ms. Galvin. Mr. D'Amato just raised his hand. I'll give Mr. D'Amato an opportunity to address the board for public comment. So if you wouldn't mind waiting, Susan, we'll get right to you after this speaker. Mr. D'Amato, for public comment, if you could just state your address for the record, please.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Andy D'Amato, 26 Pierce Street. And I am a town meeting member for Precinct 7, and I am also on the East Milton Neighborhood Association Board. And I was just wondering about whether or not, you were going to go ahead and vote on this, as you said, you might on the last meeting. And we are currently in discussions with Michael Moore. We met with him last week, and I thought it was a productive meeting, and I believe he did as well. He has also agreed to meet with the neighbors as a whole, which is something the developer has not done to this point. He has met with the neighborhood association board members, but not with the full neighborhood. So he has agreed to do so. And we're going to try to set that up for later next week, maybe Thursday or Friday, depending on schedules. So I respectfully ask for you not to vote on this until there is the participation with the neighborhood as a whole. And that's it.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. D'Amato. I see one other hand. We have a couple more minutes left in Citizen Speak. So Betty Shea, please state your address for the record. And please try to be brief.
Hi, my name is Betty Shea. I'm from 26 Mechanic Street. And basically, I just wanted to just say what Mr. D'Amato just said, was that we haven't talked to anyone, and it's going to make a big impact on my life. So much so that I plan on selling my house because of this. And I'll just wait until they have the meeting next week. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shea. All right, we are back now. If everyone could please mute. Thank you very much. All right, so we'll go back now to our town clerk, Susan Galvin, to discuss the new voting precincts. Good evening, Susan. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and fellow members of the Select Board, and Mr. Dennehy. I gave abbreviated description of what re-precincting would entail for the town on Tuesday. I would like to just go over the reasons for re-precincting, just so that the committee has a better understanding, and so that the general public does. So I worked with two groups. The town had a re-precincting working group. It consisted of myself, Town Administrator Michael Dennehy, Director of Planning and Community Development, I always killed Tim's last name, Sawinski. GIS Specialist Alan Bishop, and they were tremendously helpful. This was my first time ever going through the redistricting process, and it was a very talented group. I also worked with, in 2012, at the annual town meeting, under Article 41, a redistricting committee was established to be appointed by the moderator. And their charge basically was to advise and to assist the select board in fulfilling the select board's statutory obligation under the Massachusetts Constitution to redraw re-precinct lines, and that occurs every 10 years. The redistricting committee members, again, very talented group, consisted of one member from each of the 10 precincts, as well as myself. So in precinct 1, we had Earl Fay. In precinct 2, we had Deborah Azarad Savona. In precinct 3, we had Jay Fundling. In precinct 4, we had Akwan Ibong, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name. In precinct 5, we had Kevin Keating. In precinct 6, we had Francis Morrissey. In precinct 7, we had Michael Mahalchuk. In precinct 8, we had Barbara Martin. In precinct 9, we had Sean Fahey. And finally, in precinct 10, we had Amanda Sider. Again, a great group. They were very interested in helping with the process. We met on last week on Thursday. I showed them what the state was proposing. There were some tweaks that we have presented to you folks. So basically, our task is that the municipalities has the responsibility to establish precinct boundaries. And that occurs every 10 years after the federal census, except in Boston. And basically, it's based upon our population, not the number of voters. It's strictly based upon what the population is in those particular areas. And our task, our goals are to evenly distribute the population of the precincts and to ensure that there's going to be equal representation by town meeting members, and also considering our neighborhoods in geographic dividing lines. So what is a precinct? A precinct is the smallest geographical bounded unit used for state election purposes. And there's some rules. So no precinct can contain any more than 4,000 residents or inhabitants. Other rules is that a block can't be split, and the only numbers we can use are the numbers that are provided to us by the federal census. Every precinct must be within a 5% range. So either 5 above the median range or 5% below the median range. Let's see. Each precinct has to be composed of compact and contiguous territory. They have to be bounded by the center line of streets or other well-defined boundaries, such as streams or bodies of water, railroad tracks, power lines, or something clearly visible that is a figure. So impacts. The voters that are changed in each of the precincts, and for Milton, we're going to have 5 precincts that are going to be impacted. So every voter in those precincts will need to be notified that there's going to be a change in their precinct in writing. The other thing is that every town meeting member in those precincts will need to, all those seats will be open for re-election. The 5 remaining precincts, only those that are up for, only the seats that are up for 2022 will be impacted and will run. So the population in Milton in 2010 was 27,003, and it's grown to 28,630, which is about a 6% increase in population. So again, our goals were, when we looked at the challenges presented in front of us, was to retain the precinct lines that had already been established in 2010. That would minimize the changes and retain 10 precincts. So we had so our target for population would be 2,860. So the meaning behind that is that that's the midpoint that we would want each of the 10 precincts to be in that. And then we have a minimum that no precinct could go below 2,720, and no precinct could go above 3,006.
Madam Chair and Madam Clerk, can I share my screen just to show the sheet that the clerk shared with us?
That would be great. Thank you.
this shows the breakdown.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dennehy.
Can everyone see that?
That's perfect. Thank you, Mr. Dennehy. So as you can see, based on our configurations, we are meeting those maximum and minimum goals. The highest population would be in precinct 3. Our lowest population is going to be in, it looks like precinct 5. And although in area precinct 5 looks like a very large area, there is a lot of open space in precinct 5. So our population is going to be roughly 2,741. So I'd like to just talk about the areas that are going to be affected. So in total, there's going to be 5 areas or 5 precincts, I should say, affected. Precinct 3, precinct 5, precinct 6, precinct 7, and precinct 10. Precincts 3 and 6, they're going to be juggled by moving up the block at High Street up off of Adams Street, and that's currently in precinct 3. It's going to be moved into precinct 6. That would allow for us to be at the 3,005. Precinct 6 again, to account for areas in precinct 7 that needed to be bumped up. We're going to move Guilford Road from precinct 6 into 7. It gives a very nice line, and actually Guilford Road area was in precinct 7 back around 1990. But again, due to population growth, it had to be readjusted at that time. So it's nice it's going back in the Southeast Expressway is given a nice clean line there. Precinct 5 and 10, we're gonna move a little area from the triangle block at Atherton Street and Bradley Road, where it intersects, from precinct 10 into precinct 5. And then we're also going to move a block at Brush Hill Road and Cushing Road. Back in the 2010, the area that we're moving wasn't distinguished as a block, but for the 2020 census it is. And we're going to move that from precinct 10 to precinct 5. And then finally, we're going to move from precinct 5 into precinct 10, from Fairmount Ave to Cushing Road. And that allows us to have an equitably balanced precinct. Again, like I had said, ideally we would have liked to have kept the precincts as they were, but where we did have a growth in the town, it prevented us from doing that. We did minimize the impact by having 5 precincts, and I think that's the area that we would have to make the changes in.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to Town Clerk Susan Galvin. Does any member of the board have a question or a comment for Ms. Galvin? Mr. Doyle. You're on mute, Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Town Clerk Galvin. Nicely presented. And I'd like to ask for those listening, if you might be able to say a few words about the distinction between the state presentation to the town and then the town's recommendation. And as a second point, Sue, could you mention the timing that's involved in having this matter resolved?
Certainly. So the state initially proposed recommendations to the town. They gave us a map, and in their recommendation, they proposed 6 changes. One that was going to impact precinct 1. And based upon our changes, we were able to keep precinct 1 intact and thus allow for us to only make changes in 5 precincts. The redistricting committee, especially Mr. Fay, who lives in that district and represented the precinct 1 constituents, when hearing that with making other alterations, we could keep 1 intact. It was unanimously agreed by the redistricting committee to try and maintain having precinct 1 stay intact. All of the other changes are pretty small. There was a change that the state suggested from precinct 6, which would have brought Governor's Road, would have divided Governor's Road and put that into precinct 7. Currently, the division is down Plymouth, but it would have extended it. So the remaining part of Plymouth and then half of Governor's would have then been in 7. The group, the consensus of the group was that by keeping Plymouth as it is and having the line divide at the Southeast Expressway made more sense and caused for less. It used the boundary of the expressway as our center line, given that we do have a few households that are past that line, but it still gives a nice, if you're looking at the map, it does give a nice look of the map. The other area would have affected the Fontbonne area. I'm calling it the Fontbonne Triangle because that's what it looks like to me. Probably not technical at all. I'm sure it isn't. But it affected Center Street, Dudley Road, and some houses on Brook. And those households currently are in precinct 3. In precinct 3, when we compared the population numbers using the current population numbers and the current dividing of precinct boundaries, we saw that we were off by 6. And that little section in High Street had 7 voters, so really was impacting less people and less households and accommodated that need that we had. So that was a big reason as to why our group felt that it should be drawn like that. Mr. Doyle, your other question was,
Actually, you're on mute, Arthur.
Okay, the timing element, the importance of the timing element,
Right.
and then maybe mention of the election requirement for the affected precincts.
Okay, so I'll start with the requirement. The due date for the select board to approve this boundary, it has to be submitted to the state by October 30th, 2021. I do apologize about the quick turnaround. However, the town was not given the documentation. As I'm sure you can imagine, it affected everybody. Well, COVID affected the federal census and them getting the numbers out to the cities and town. And as such, we have such a short turnaround time. So that is why we have an October 30th deadline. My office received the initial draft from the state 2 weeks ago. And in that time frame, we've been able to review the maps and have the redistricting committee meet with the town's working group and come up with these changes. And I can't say enough about the working group and the redistricting committees that basically they dropped everything like yourselves to act upon this. And it's greatly appreciated. In terms of effect for our precincts, so all of this will take effect as of December 31st. What that means is our next election, or our next town election, April 2022, precincts 3, 5, 6, 7, and 10. Every town meeting member seat will be up for re-election. That's approximately 132 seats currently. The unaffected precincts, precincts 1, 2, 4, 8, and 9, only the seats that are up for re-election for 2022, only those town meeting member seats will be up for re-election. And I'll be sending out information to the town meeting members, to the public, alerting them of this so that we will have a very exciting election. I anticipate and I hope.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Galvin. Mr. Doyle, did you have anything else? No. Okay, then we'll go on to Mr. Wells.
I want to make sure I take my hand down. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Clerk. So just to clarify here, so 132 town meeting members who normally would not be running in 2022 you have to get to what they have to do the same thing, pull papers, get signatures, all of that this year.
Correct. So typically in an election, those members that are interested in running for re-election, they notify me I send out a card and say you're up for re-election, and they would sign that card saying they still intend to run. For those affected precincts, whether you were up for re-election or not, you have to pull your papers. You'll have to go within your precinct, get 10 signatures. I always ask to get 5 extras just in case somebody's not registered, and return it back to my office. We'll have to certify it. If it's certifiable, then your name would be on the ballot and you would be running for office.
And my second part to that, Madam Clerk, is that for those, I mean, I know there's all staggered terms. That's just to complete what would have been your existing term. It doesn't add any time onto your term.
So what will happen then is once the election occurs, it's broken up into the thirds. So the top third highest vote getters would be a 3-year term. The next group would get a 2-year term, and then the last group would get a 1-year term, and then the cycle would start.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. I should have said that. Thank you for asking that.
Mr. Zulus.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, Madam Chair, Madam Clerk, and hopefully it's the signatures that'll be certifiable, and not those who are seeking the signatures. Madam Clerk, I just wanted to thank you and the redistricting committee for this work. The state presented a proposal, and I think you and your committee of hardworking volunteers have come up with a better proposal. It's a proposal, as you pointed out, that affects fewer precincts, and it also maintains, in precinct 1, it maintains the number of voters, and it maintains the strength of voting in precinct 1, which I think is important. So I want to thank your committee. I think you've made a great proposal, and it's a great job. And Madam Chair, if you'd like a motion, I can make a motion on this, or if you want that now.
Sure.
I'll make a motion to accept as presented by the town clerk, Susan Galvin, the 2020 re-precincting plan for the town of Milton, Massachusetts.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Let's vote. I think we need to do this.
Ms. Collins has her hand up.
Thank you. I echo all
Sorry,
the
Melinda.
thanks. That's okay. I echo all the thanks and the kudos for the great job. It just goes to show you that local knowledge can't be replaced. But I also was wondering, Madam Clerk, if you might place that PowerPoint on the website, because it's really terrific. It's very clear. Thank you.
Oh, sure. I would be more than happy. I'll place it right on the website. And thank you. I appreciate that. It was not done by myself. And I really have to say that it was a team effort. And I'm just the spokesperson. There was a lot of hands in this. So thank you.
And I'll echo the thanks to Susan Galvin and her team and the committee. This is our second meeting hearing about this proposal this week, and we all appreciate your efforts and the great materials. So we have a motion that's been made and seconded. If there's no other discussion, going once, going twice, then all in favor of the motion, Mr. Doyle.
Yes.
Mr. Zulus.
Yes.
Ms. Collins.
Yes.
Mr. Wells.
Absolutely, yes.
And myself, yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank-
So we all need to sign the a certified copy of our vote this evening. So if everyone could get into town hall tomorrow, ideally, or Friday, we'd want to submit this on Friday. Is it being submitted by email or, I know you need a wedding signature, but are you scanning this and submitting it, or are you mailing it? I think it's Friday enough, I guess is the question.
As long as I had it by Friday morning, that would be great. I'm going to email it and then follow up with a hard copy.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yeah. Yes.
Are we signing in the clerk's office or in our office? Where will it be?
It's would be in our office, I believe.
Okay.
Right.
And Mr. Dennehy will take care of making sure that the clerk gets it.
Thank you, Madam
And
Chair.
if anyone can't get into town hall, you maybe could just authorize the town administrator or someone in the office to sign on your behalf. Okay, thanks very much,
Thank
Susan.
you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Clerk. Great job.
Okay, next on our agenda is a discussion. It's on our discussion for it's on our agenda rather for discussion and vote of support for the concept plan for 426 440 Granite Avenue development. And at Citizen Speak tonight, a couple of residents asked us not to vote. Let's just so we're all on the same page. Let's go over the background. When we met about 6 weeks ago and first heard a presentation by Attorney McKettrick and her client Michael Moore and the architectural team, Mr. Wells, you had suggested maybe we take a vote on it. We deferred that to a future meeting. We had a follow-up discussion maybe 2 weeks ago. We had some further discussion around the affordable units and the updated plans. And at that time, Ms. McKettrick reported that there was an increase from 3 to 4 affordable units, and there'd be a meeting with the Affordable Housing Trustees, which I can report on as our member on the Affordable Housing Trustees. And we scheduled it at that time for a discussion this evening and a potential vote if that's the wish of the board. So, we'll before we open it for discussion, I think we should give Attorney McKettrick and her client, Mr. Moore, an opportunity to give us any updates. We have some letters. We have a shadow study. We have a copy of a letter that's been submitted to the planning board. We've also received a letter from Julie Kramer, who's the chair of the Affordable Housing Trustees, summarizing the position of the Affordable Housing Trustees at a meeting last week. And I can shed a little more light on that as well. But I think it's probably best to turn this over first to Attorney McKettrick and her client, Mr. Moore, and give them an opportunity to share any information they may wish.
Thank you very much. I'm Mary McKettrick. I've been representing the applicants in their process of site plan approval application with the planning board. And if we do get site plan approval, we will also be going to the Board of Appeals because this proposal requires not only site plan approval, it requires several variances. It's based on a concept for which there is no current zoning to the extent that it's a mixed use proposal. It also uses a rather different and innovative parking design, which is really not addressed in our zoning bylaw. So this is going to be a pretty extended process for reviewing this proposal. And I would say we have we have a number of hurdles to surmount in order to get full approval. We do feel that we have presented all the information that we have about this concept to the planning board. And we've had 3 meetings with you, and I've tried to keep you abreast of updates as we've gone along. So that's why we've sent you a plan that shows you where the affordable units would be, 1 on the first floor, 1 second, 1 third, 1 fourth. We have a kind of a new concept for your affordable unit on the first floor, which is it would be an artist's residence and studio. That one would be a rental unit in order to have better oversight over how it's used. It's kind of a creative concept because there are big windows. We're going to replace one of the commercial spaces with that affordable unit. And I think your chairman is going to address the trustees of the affordable housing trustees and their discussion and their recommendation. I also have sent you updated information on shadows, and the reason we're not going to talk about shadows at any length tonight. The bottom line is that there is virtually no shadow effect from this project because of the way it's designed, because the height of the building is right against the expressway, and the back of the building is very low. It's 10 feet and then 20 feet at the rear. And we had to make a correction. There was an error in our shadow studies that we did last spring, but it didn't change the situation. It made it, if anything, even better. There is no significant shadow effect. And it's an important point because we're talking about detriment to the neighborhood, substantial detriment based on the design of the building. So I hope you've had a chance to look at those. We also did a new study, which I think illustrates better what I'm talking about, which is a layered study showing existing shadows, which are pretty substantial. Shadows from this building, they're all in different colors in the layers, and then shadows from this building if we took the top floor off and made it this building, but with 4 stories. And what's important about that comparison is that there's almost no difference between the 5-story and the 4-story building in terms of the shadow effect. So, I mean, this is the type of detail that the planning board's looking at. The Board of Appeals will be very interested in that because the whole argument has to do with not only the legal justification for a variance, this is a very unusual site, but also substantial detriment to the neighborhood for the special permit application. The reason I mention it to you, though, is that it's a sort of a general point that, well, first of all, I want to make it to the public. So I hope people are watching this meeting. We're going to be talking about it tomorrow night as well. And I hope that the select board understands that because we've done a lot of work. We've been very concerned about impact in the neighborhood. As far as the role of the reason we're asking you for your vote is that we really think that you should weigh in with your opinion. This is going to be a long process and the select board doesn't make the decision. We know that. But you are important, I think, in your role as the chief executive for the town. And this is a problematic site. This row of buildings along the expressway is a very difficult site to come up with a development concept for. It's in our business district, and there hasn't been any development at all over decades. The current zoning just doesn't really seem to allow enough flexibility. So what we've chosen to do is to come up with a concept that's new. And with something like this, it's kind of like when the Hood warehouse burned down and we had to come up with a concept for the development down at the wharf. The selectmen were very involved in that process. I was on the board at that time. And we didn't decide what the zoning should be. The town meeting did. We didn't decide what the development should be like. But we definitely paid attention and tried to decide what we thought about it, and we let people know. That was a role that seemed appropriate, and I think it's equally appropriate here. Nevertheless, we want your support. We don't think you're making the decision, and we do expect to be continuing to discuss many aspects of this development with the neighborhood, the East Milton Neighborhood Association, of course, the Planning Board, and hopefully the Board of Appeals. So Michael Moore is here. And I don't know if he'd like to add anything. He has been meeting or did meet with some members of the East Milton Neighborhood Association last Friday. Is there anything you want to add, Michael?
Sure, thanks, Marion. Just that we firmly believe in this concept, in this design, but we also will continue to engage with the neighborhood and take feedback. But this is a really good project for this site and for the town, for all the reasons that we've spelled out in the past. And I hope that you can support it.
Okay, thank you. I would be happy to answer questions if you have any. I know I sent you the whole memorandum that I sent to the planning board because I wanted you, I have two discussions in that memo about, one is about height and why this building has this height, how it is that the enclosed parking somewhat increases the height of the first floor and contributes to the building being a bit higher. And the other part, of course, was about the shadow studies. And then finally, I reviewed two extensive peer reviews that we've just finished them and they're completely done. One was for traffic and parking. The other one was for engineering and stormwater management. You know, when a peer review questions come back, you have to add more information and answer questions. There's been a back and forth for a couple of months for each of those. We've supplied all the information requested, and the bottom line is that the design for the development is appropriate in terms of those factors. So I did want you to see that, and I'm happy to answer the questions if you have any. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Mr. Moore and Ms. McKettrick. So why don't we open it up to the board for discussion at this point? This is our third meeting on this topic, and the planning board has had several meetings. Would anyone like to weigh in?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr.
Just a
Wells.
point. It might be prudent for us to, I don't know if Tim is with us, but I know Allison Quinn is with us. And I know that she and Tim have worked extensively on this project. I think it might be prudent for the board to hear. I know that, I believe that Allison and Tim may have submitted comments or some report, comments to the planning board recently. I'd like to hear, it might be prudent for all of us to hear somewhat what Allison might have to say.
I'm glad you noticed. I did not see that Allison Quinn had joined us. So Allison, certainly, please feel free to unmute and join us if you'd like. I suspect that Tim Zerwinski is probably at the 582 Bluehill Avenue 40B hearing at this time.
He is, yes. So I had joined a little early. I am actually speaking to you on the next agenda item, but I'm happy to give comments. Thank you, Chair and Select Board members. You know, so from the perspective of evaluating an application for site plan approval, and within the purview of the scope of the planning board to give feedback, I believe that there's been a very thorough and thoughtful process. You know, East Milton Square has a slew of challenges that I think impact the way they feel about projects. I know right before, I think right before Bill left and, you know, kind of COVID hit, some of the East Milton folks had shared a spreadsheet with us of some of the issues that they've been trying to mitigate. And I had shared it with some of the department heads, and we had really started to address some of the low hanging fruit. And then, you know, everything kind of shut down on us. So I know that there are some kind of pre-existing conditions that East Milton residents deal with that probably impact the way that they feel about development. And that those are things that we can't really control for. It'd be great to be as helpful as we can and to be partners with them as they try to work through some of those issues. I do think that this particular applicant and the team have done a good job in providing information that's been requested and providing information that helps folks evaluate the merits of their application. All of the peer review has been done. The applicant has been responsive to that. So that having been said, you know, there's always going to be a little nuance. I'm encouraged to hear that the applicant wants to be a long-term partner with East Milton Square residents and coming up with some of the remaining issues that need to be resolved. But I do think that they've done a good job in presenting their application and being open about where they are with their height. And they've mitigated some of the issues. So that having been said, That's my opinion. I think the project, again, giving the scope that the planning board reviews, they have thoroughly completed the application and the scope of those issues. Is that helpful?
I think it is. Ms. Could I ask you just a procedural question? This is on the planning board's agenda tomorrow evening.
Yes.
So it's on for site plan approval at the planning board. Is the planning board planning on closing their hearing tomorrow, or do you have any sense of what the planning board process is from here?
I have no understanding right now if that is the plan. I'm sure that they'll want to get some more feedback. It may, I think that's up to the discretion of the chair.
Yeah, and I just haven't had a chance to reach out to her this week. So, okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think I should probably report on behalf of the Affordable Housing Trustees. We did meet a week ago. And as Julie Kramer stated in her letter, there was a lengthy discussion with Attorney McKettrick and Mr. Moore regarding the new proposal, which is 4 affordable units rather than 3. There was a lot of enthusiasm for that. All members of the Affordable Housing Trust were present, although Mr. Callahan had another meeting at the same time and was there for part of the discussion, had to leave before we voted. There was a lot of interest and a lot of discussion around the ground level unit, which members of the Affordable Housing Trust requested be considered for rental, to be owned, continue to be owned like the commercial space would be by Mr. Moore and his development team, but rented to an artist or someone who would live and work in the space and perhaps create studio space and have it divided so that there was a 2-bedroom unit as well as commercial space, hopefully in the realm of the arts. So there's a lot of interest in that particular unit. And it was, some of the things that we noted were that this project would be over 10%. The 4 units would bring this project closer to 12%. And that's in line with the percentages at the Henry site and at 36 Central, which is also Mr. Moore's project. So there was, it was a 4 vote with 4 votes in favor and 1 abstention, only because Mr. Callahan had to leave. I think he was technically still in the Zoom meeting, but had to step out. So, but there was unanimous support among the 4 members who voted for this proposal and for the 4 units. And we have a letter from Julie setting forth a little more detail. So we'll open the floor to the board for anyone who may wish to speak. Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, you know, we're looking at the concept. We've heard that everyone's talking, and there's still steps at the planning board and also at the ZBA for things to be worked out. And several of us have already voted on the concept. So I wanted to say that information's already out there. So I'm not changing my thoughts about it, other than to say thank you for the, considering and then adopting the additional unit. And I think that's a innovative and a welcome innovation to make it into a sort of joint studio and living space, and to ask that it remain, a rental unit as well. So thank you.
And Ms. Collins, maybe just for anyone who's watching tonight who didn't see the previous meetings, I think we should clarify, when you refer to previous votes of support, that was the Select Board's Housing Committee that weighed in. I know you were Mr. Doyle. I happened to be at that meeting because it was joint with the Master Plan Committee, as well as would have been joined with the Affordable Housing Trustees, but we didn't have a quorum that evening. But the votes were of the Housing Committee, and I think also the Master Plan Implementation Committee, to support the concept. And I was one of the people who voted as an Affordable Housing Trustee at last week's meeting on the Affordable Housing Plan of 4 units in support of that. So I just wanted to clarify that. Anyone else? Mr. Wells.
Madam Chair, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Melinda. You know, I did suggest this. I've followed this closely. I've had numerous conversations with Allison. For Mrs. McGettrick, you sat in our seat for, I believe, a dozen years. Am I correct? And
Yes.
so you understand the role that we have here. And I've listened deeply to my friend, Mr. Coyle, my neighbor, Mr. Coyle, and also to my neighbor, Andy D'Amato. You know, the one thing that Mr. Moore has done is, and I said this previously, the one thing that I did like is that, you know, he did create 36 Central Avenue, and he put it into that neighborhood seamlessly. And as a boy who grew up, whose father worked in that building when it was a police station for, I think, 20 years, you built a building that almost kind of looked like what the police station was. And I commented about that I hope that the look of this would fit into the square. My bigger concerns have been, and I agree with Melinda on the concept, that this is something definitely that, even though many residents won't publicly say it, there are a lot of residents, particularly in East Milton, particularly those that are getting up in years, that would like to sell their houses, would like to move in to a place like this and have ownership in it. And that's a need that, unlike the affordable need, it's a bigger need than more people. But my greater concerns are two things: is that, Mr. McGettrick, you know this by right, I believe you could build 45 feet, a commercial building tomorrow, correct? Which would be
Correct.
all offices, which would generate much more traffic pressure and all of that in a square that is already busy enough. But going back to a project, as Andy and Jim know, that many members of EMDA worked on before, I think there were 4 units off and it fell apart, and now we're looking at a comprehensive project that is significantly more. So my greater concern is that if this doesn't come to fruition, then we look at potentially, and I said this to you last week, Mr. McGettrick, a comprehensive project that would be significantly larger in the square, and that's part of mine. So, Madam Chair, I am willing to give like another week if my colleagues, if the board members, just to let MDEC meet one more time, Mr. Moore. But I agree with Melinda and you and Allison. I've listened, as well as the neighbors. That Mr. Moore does have a concept here and is looking to be a partner in East Milton Square. He's not an outsider. He's not looking to just build something and be 50 miles away and not care. He's demonstrated, and I've never met the man. He's demonstrated that by 36 Central Avenue. And I believe, as Allison Quinn said, he's trying to do that here. So I'm willing to go either way with what you want to do. If you want to wait one more week, let East Milton meet one more time with him and then come back to us. And I get the reason why we need to come. So, I think that concludes where I'm at right now, depending on where we go. I see Mr. Zulus has his hand up. He strategically waited to speak last here. He looks like, with that headphone, Michael, you look like you're on Ness and not Milton Select Board. You're on
That's right. That's right.
You're doing a Nesson
That's
game.
right.
Okay. Thank you,
I wish I, oh, pardon me. Sorry, Madam Chair.
No, I was just calling on you to speak next. And then I'll go.
I wish I were that, sorry. I wish I were that strategic, Richard. I wish I had that amount of strategy in me. But I appreciate your thoughts, Richard, on waiting until after, at least until after the meeting with the residents. Let me say that I appreciate the efforts of Attorney McKettrick and Mr. Moore and our planning department to respond to the concerns here, to increase the number of units. And I think everything, and also to meet last week with the representatives of East Milton Neighborhood Association and to schedule a meeting with all the residents. I think that's all in the right direction. Having said that, as we know, the East Milton Neighborhood Association has asked us to wait, given that they are in discussions and that they seek compromise. And the East Milton Neighborhood Association also provided us with about 47 pages of comments from residents, some in support, some in opposition. And one, which I will adopt and as my own, it was from Dick Burke. And Dick, as resident, is well known to many of us. And Dick offered what he called his cautious endorsement, and said he hoped there may be room for compromise between the developer and the residents. And that's where I am. And so I appreciate the thought, and I hope the board will defer voting at this point. I think it is premature for us to put our thumb on the scale, given that there are discussions going on and discussions plans and more resident involvement planned. And so while I can offer my cautious endorsement and my appreciation for all the feedback here, if we have a vote, I wouldn't want to abstain, and I would have to vote no because I think it's premature. And so I think I'd appreciate it if we could wait until we get that resident input, because I'm certainly in the right direction here, and can offer my cautious endorsement of the concept, but I don't think it's appropriate for our board to take that step at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zulus. Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to get back to your mentioning the Master Plan Implementation Committee, and it did vote in support with a 4-0 vote. I want to acknowledge and respect all the speakers on this topic this evening and on other occasions, personally, by mail, etc. Those in the public comment period, our discussion here. But I want to also have us underscore what is asked of us, and that is an endorsement of a concept. And concepts are very generic. They are not specific. There is a long road yet to be traveled. And ultimately, the Zoning Board of Appeals is going to have a lot to say about specificity that's going to be well beyond the ken of everybody involved. So I hope that in looking at this, we understand clearly that endorsing a concept that people have spoken about here quite favorably, minus specifics that are yet to be resolved, and acknowledging that what is being asked is that the idea or the intention to do something of this nature is what's on the table.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Doyle. Mr. Zulus.
Could I just ask if what would be the definition of the concept? Is the concept a building? Is a concept this building? I guess the question is, what is the concept as that we'd be considering?
I think I might offer a perspective on that, and then let's see what the other members of the board think. I think it's a project substantially in the form as presented to us. I think it's a mixed-use proposal with density, rather the height and the intensity of use on the side that faces the highway, that has more than 10% affordable units, that has commercial space and is mixed use, and I think is in line with what the Barrett report reported. So as we go through the planning board process, and the Board of Appeals hasn't even started reviewing this yet, I think there's going to be changes as we go along, because that's usually what happens. There'll be some changes, but I think the overall concept that we're talking about would be a project of this scale and size with the mixed use, with the affordable housing component. That's how I view the idea of a concept plan. And Mr. Wells has his hand up. If any other member of the board would also like to weigh in, and I'll invite the developer to also weigh in, since and Mr. Coyle, I see that your hand is raised, but this is not a public hearing, so we're not going to be engaging in a lot of back and forth. This is really the board's discussion this evening with the developer and his team. And unless some of my colleagues on the board would like to hear additional resident input, it's after 8 o'clock, and this is our third meeting on the topic. So I'd like to try to keep our agenda moving along. We have other topics to get to. Richard, I think you had your
No,
hand.
I do. I agree with you, Madam Chair. The only thing that is clear here, though, is these units, I didn't say it, but what I was alluding to is, and I believe I'm correct, these are ownership, correct? These are units that residents would be able to take ownership in. And currently, that is an opportunity that's very limited in this community. Very limited. As we know, Marion, when she spoke about when they created 88 Wharf, which is much larger, but it is ownership. To get in there today, to be able to buy an open unit when they rarely do come open, it's pretty much word of mouth. You have to know someone to tell someone to be able to get in there, and that is the silent resident group that I referred to. That I'm sure, Katie, you've heard them as well. That like very much interested in having ownership in a place like this, and that's what I wanted to Michael's point about concept. I just want to add that to this concept. These are that have ownership. So, thank you,
Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, Mr. Wells, I think that's an important point. And the other thing I wanted to add was the concept of approximately $300,000 annual revenue for the town, which I think, I know anyway, continue to get comments, calls, and just chats on the street about please find a way to increase revenue in the town. So thank you. That's part of the concept for me.
Anyone else on the concept plan? I'd like to share my thoughts on the proposal. So speaking individually, I remain enthusiastically in support of this project. I think that this is, as Marion McKettrick said, this is a unique site, and 5 stories facing the highway. I do not object to that. I think the fact that the developer is stepping the building back in the area that faces the residential section is a good thing. I support that. I'm enthusiastic about the ground level commercial space. I like the look of the building. I'm one who also likes the more traditional brick buildings, but I like this modern look. I think it could help East Milton. There's not a uniform design system throughout East Milton Square as there is in Milton Village. This property would generate a substantial amount of tax revenue. I think it's what Milton needs. It would help diversify our housing stock. We have a lot of single family homes, as we all know, and not enough condominium units and apartment rentals. And I think, what's the alternative here? Mr. Wells touched on this at the last meeting again this evening. I think the alternative to this project is probably a comprehensive permit 40B application. That's been our recent history in town. That's what we've seen from developers. So I think we have a local builder who's built a good high quality building on Central Avenue. That building also faced a lot of opposition many years ago when it was being built and being proposed. This particular area isn't a business district. On each side of the proposal are commercial uses. Behind the building would be Mechanic Street and the Pierce Street neighborhood. And I hear clearly, and I listened to the comments from the resident, Ms. Shea, who lives at 26 Mechanic. I think the shadow study that the developer has done hopefully will be shared with the immediate neighbors to address some of their concerns. We as a select board, I think, need to look at the interests of the town as a whole and what's in the best interest of the town. I know we're all guided by that, but I that's the perspective that I'm coming from in weighing in on this project. And I think it's in the best interest of the town to diversify our housing stock, to try to add some commercial and mixed use space in this area and help improve East Milton Square. I think this will improve the square considerably and lead to further development that would be high quality development for the square. I think it's consistent with Barrett report, it's consistent with the master plan, and consistent with the housing production plan. So that's my individual perspective. And we're talking about concept plan. I think we should give Attorney McGettrick an opportunity to weigh in if she'd like to on the idea of the concept plan. If the understanding that members of this board have expressed is what she and her clients share.
Would you like me to do that now?
If you would, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to the discussion with the board members and all very interesting, thoughtful comments. the concepts, the characteristics that you've identified of this concept are what I would say we're looking for agreement with. So these are concepts of mixed use, ground floor commercial, the density, more or less, that we're talking about, the number of units, the fact that one side of this building that will have a height of 5 stories, general layout. There are still many details. We've certainly had some discussion, and we think we have a good exterior design, but using the same layout, the same concept, the same density, we can talk about details like that going forward, and there may be others. But in the last 5, we're about to have our 6th hearing with the planning board. We had an initial meeting with neighbors in 2020. We gave you a list of all the meetings that we've had, but at the beginning of 2021, we met with the board of the EMNA, and they gave us a list of concerns, and that was extremely helpful. We've paid attention to those concerns I'm working with the architect and the developer to try to design a project, and then going through this hearing process to try to answer in more detail why there is no shadow impact, why there is no noise impact, how we'll address traffic and parking, why it will be manageable and will not have any detrimental impact, how we will manage construction on the site, how we will manage stormwater drainage, and to meet all of the requirements that the town has to not create any additional impact on neighbors. We have worked on those details, but we're not asking you to vote on those. We're asking you to vote on the general concept. And we believe that this development can be done here using those general features. And if not, then what we see, but who knows, we see developments that you would not like as much. I mean, this has been we did meet with the East Milton Neighborhood Association, I think in 2 days before, and an open meeting, supposed to be open to everybody, on Zoom, approximately 2 days before we began the hearing process in May. And then we had a list of comments coming out of that meeting, and we've addressed them and answered each comment as we've gone along. So it isn't like this hasn't happened. There's been back and forth. We've had public hearings in which most of the time in each hearing has been devoted to comments from the public. And after each public hearing, we have responded in writing and placed our comments, because this is the way the planning board does it, on the website for everybody to read. So there's an awful lot of information out there at this point. I don't think the problem is that there hasn't been enough information. I do believe that continued interaction and continued refinement and improvement will occur if we continue to communicate. And it's always most important to communicate with the nearby neighbors and with the neighborhood where the development's located. So we're very much in favor of doing that, and we are expecting to continue with that next week. But your description of the concept that we're asking for support for is accurate. And it is very meaningful we like to know what you think, not only as individuals, but as a board. So, we would be very happy if you would be willing to say tonight, we agree with that concept, and as a board that we vote to support it. We hope that's what you'd want to do, but, I'm not sure. Well, I can't say for sure, but, if you delay it, well, okay, but we've had 3 meetings, so I don't really know what else I can tell you. I think you have everything that I have for you to consider as to voting to approve this concept. And in the sense that you think that we should go forward with it, you're encouraging us to continue the process, encouraging us to refine all the details of the project, but try to move forward with it. That's what we want to hear from you. And I appreciate it if, I'm hearing it already in your individual comments, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Doyle.
Madam Chair, based upon the rich discussion about clarifications with respect to the concept, I move that the select board support the concept plan for 426, 440 Granite Avenue.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Ms. Collins. Thank you, Mr. Doyle, and discussion. And obviously, you know, we're 5 members. We have 5 different viewpoints. We're not always unanimous. We don't have to be unanimous. And reasonable minds can disagree. So why don't we have further discussion on the motion? Mr. Wells,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
No, but-
And I want to address this to all of us that are here tonight, is that once in a while I use the term that the single commonality amongst all of us in this community is 0286. We all live here. This is where we make our homes. This is where we raise our families. In my case, it was the livelihood of employment for the majority of my life. So to everyone who's on this call now, and especially to to Arthur and to our fellow neighbors in East Milton, it's not that we don't hear you, and not that we don't have a love of this community just as you do. Regardless of how we vote right now, I think that for everyone on this call, that as Marion said, and as you said, Madam Chair, there are so many changes. The dialogue will be going, and the dialogue will be continuing. But just to my final point, as I said earlier, my greater concern from past history is that if we don't, this is a concept that I do like, and that if we don't, based on all the information, professional information that's been given to us, that we don't embrace this, what we'll be facing if this is defeated, not defeated, but if this fails, it does not, the concept of it doesn't, the alternative concepts truly worry me, and I think my neighbors know what I'm referring to. So thank you for allowing me to comment one more time.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Zulus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that I'm still in the same place. I'm certainly, as in the terms of Mr. Burke, have cautious endorsement, but I just think as a matter of process, we've been asked by the residents, by the East Milton Neighborhood Association, to defer on this until they have an opportunity to have that meeting with the residents, hopefully next week. And I just think as a matter of process, it's premature for us to do it. And I think in some ways it's a pity because, a couple of weeks down the line, it could be a unanimous vote, but tonight it won't be just because based on the process. So anyway, so those are my thoughts. I haven't changed my view. Forced to vote, I'll vote no. Although I think the concept is certainly going in the right direction. I think to put our thumb on the scale before that meeting with the residents, just as a matter of process, that I'm not in favor of that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zulus. Anyone else? Any further discussion?
I think, Madam Chair, just one final point to Michael's point here is that I don't think we're closing, no matter what happens, I don't think we're closing the door. I think that if anyone wants to come back and address the point in it, a follow-up to their discussions, anything. I mean, we're not in the business of closing the door on people. We're not. I'm just to say, from my own personal opinion, I'm listening to all the information that's been given us from our experts. That's where I'm at. But I'm if Jim Coyle, Andy DeMato, or anyone else was to call me or wants to go to Bastani and ask for an agenda item that's going forward, I'm 150% behind that. So I am fine.
Thank you, Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I echo Mr. Wells's, what he's saying, that I think we're all hearing, what neighbors in the neighborhood has to say. And there is real concern that I share about being where we were, a couple of years ago. And also the fact that we're not, that it's not all finished and sewn up, and that everybody seems to be working really well together. And we have the planning board and the ZBA, making sure that that things are addressed well, makes me feel like, again, it's the concept, and I just feel that it's useful to them to know that that the concept in general is acceptable, and it just seems like useful information to me, to them, and maybe it's not. It may do nothing, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zulus.
I just will offer that everyone is now, it seems, working well together. But one of the parties to this has asked us not to weigh in, and hope, my hope is that that doesn't throw off the balance. That doesn't throw off the efforts that are ongoing. And that's my concern, that if we put our thumb on the scale here as a board, that those positive efforts will somehow be compromised. So that's my concern. I as I've articulated, as I said a few times, so I won't belabor it, but I just wanted to say that my concern is that process, that if we take this action now, that process may be compromised.
Thank you, Mr. Zulus. My thought, just on the point about the East Milton Neighborhood Association request, I've heard a lot of different viewpoints expressed by residents of East Milton, and I know that the board of the East Milton Neighborhood Association has made that request, but I've also heard a lot of voices in East Milton who have a different view, and I think Judy Barrett expressed that to us during her discussion of the East Milton working group's progress. So there's a lot of different views here. So I'm viewing this more from the perspective of, is this in the best interest of the town? And I think I won't belabor it either, because reasonable minds can disagree. I think we have a good local, high quality developer who I'm hoping, and I'll make the direct request to continue the dialogue with the neighborhood representatives and the Precinct 7 representatives and all other interested parties. I've heard from a lot of voices around town who are in support of this project, and they don't live right in East Milton Square, but that's our chief business and commercial and shopping area. And it's an interest. Each of these projects, all of the 40Bs, all of the proposed, the Henry's building, all of them, I think we look at from what's in the best interest of the town, and I'm viewing it through that lens. And I think the developer will continue to work with the immediate abutters who are the most affected. Issues like traffic, and a lot of those issues will get vetted through the planning board and the Board of Appeals process. That said, I certainly respect the differing views of my colleagues on this topic. So is there any other discussion? If not, we will vote on Mr. Doyle's motion.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Wells.
One final thought. So, to Mr. Zulis's point, what would a week do? If thinking here, if the concern is that waiting one more week, I mean, I wouldn't wait longer than another week, but I would wait a week to give these residents one more chance to talk, have one more meeting with Mr. Moore. It seems that everything has been positive dialogue so far. If, to Mr. Zulis's point, if us not doing that could perhaps I don't want to use what is it when a train goes off the track? I can't remember what the term is called.
Derail.
Derail, yes.
Off the rails.
Yeah, I don't want to derail it, but and I do everything I've said. I do endorse this concept as all the things you've said, Madam Chair. Maybe one more week. I wouldn't go any further than that. And Mr. Zulus, I would say this to you, Michael, that I wouldn't go further than another week, but to give them that opportunity to meet one more time, I would do that. I'd even meet next Friday to vote on whatever it is after they meet. I'd be willing to have a special meeting for that. That's just my final comment, Madam Chair. Just a thought.
Yes, Mr. Wells, I guess my thought on that is if there is a neighborhood meeting with the developer next week that fine tunes the project even further or makes some change, it's probably not going to be a substantially different project. So if that is achieved and there's even more support among the East Milton Neighborhood Association for some change to the project, that all the better. That doesn't, our vote the week before wouldn't be nullified or anything by that. It could only help the process. So I'm not so inclined to just to schedule another meeting. Just speaking as one member of the board, I'm not really in favor of scheduling a meeting next week just to see if there's something new that comes out of the meeting between the developer and some of the residents. If that succeeds and that moves the project forward even better, then that's all to the good. I hope it will, but I'm guessing that's the concept would still be the same. Maybe I'm not articulating well enough, but it doesn't sound as though that's going to dramatically change the concept that as we've discussed it over the course of 3 meetings.
I get it.
Any other?
I hear.
If there's no other discussion, let's just wait another couple of seconds and see if anything else. Then we'll go to vote on Mr. Doyle's motion, seconded by Ms. Collins. All in favor, Mr. Doyle,
Yes.
Mr. Zulus,
No.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Wells.
For the week, my heart is saying, yes, but my head is saying no. So reluctantly, I'm going to vote no. I think that we could do something. No, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I missed your vote, Richard. I heard
No.
Vote is no. Okay. And myself, Ms. Conlon, yes. Okay, so we're 3-2. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you to Ms. McGetrick and Mr. Moore. I guess I'll
Thank
just,
you.
colleagues, we should probably report to the planning board what our discussion and our vote was this evening. And I'd be happy to do that on behalf of the board. I can communicate that to Denny Swenson as the chair, or maybe attend their meeting tomorrow night in person to report on the affordable. Julie Kramer is not available this week, so I could report for Julie Kramer on the Affordable Housing Trustees position and on our vote, if that's agreeable to the board.
Madam Chair, could I just say something?
Yes, Mr. Moore.
That we fully intend to continue our dialogue with the neighbors and the East Milton Square Neighborhood Association. So just for the record, I mean, we're going to continue that throughout the process.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you for coming in this evening and the other evenings. And thank you, Ms. McKettrick.
Thank you. Thank you, and very informative discussion. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay. We have a lot of people here for a few different agenda items. The next item on our agenda is the Neponset River dredging design and permit resolution, and then we have 2 veterans items. I should have mentioned at the beginning of our meeting that we're going to need to defer our items 9, which is the Fire Station Building Committee's owners project. And number 15, we've already appointed the committees at our meeting on Monday evening. I would suggest then that we move 10, 11, and 12 to later in the agenda so that we can try to reach some of these items that we have people here for this evening. So number 6.
Good idea.
Okay, so number 6, Mr. Wells, we put this on at your suggestion. You had mentioned this at our last meeting. This is the Neponset River dredging design and permit project. And I know Allison Quinn is here for this as well. Good evening.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair. Good evening, members of the board. Richard asked me to give you an update as to where we are with our dredging and our design and pre-permitting application for dredging the Neponset River. So about 2.5 weeks ago, I think now, Mr. Wells, Ms. Collins, and myself, along with Tim Zawinski, Director of Planning and Community Development, Margaret LaForest from the state, and some members of Quincy, went on a tour of the Neponset River. We left from Squantum Point Park, went all the way down to Milton Landing, and then all the way back up through up Dorchester Bay, up to where UMass Boston is. And the purpose of our tour was to see the condition of the river as it is now. We went out during high tide so that we could get in and out of the area. Since that visit, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that the District Council for Dorchester, Frank Baker, and his Chief of Staff were also with us. Since that visit, we have been working with Time Bond, an engineering company, Marina Fernandez, our engineer, our town engineer, on an application to put forward to the Seaport Economic Council for the, permitting and design of the dredging project. When we got feedback from the Seaport Economic Council, they are the folks who recommended that we include Quincy in Boston. They felt that our application in the first round was a great project, but they felt that it was in their best interest, as they are an economic council, to partner up with the other two municipalities to see if we could capture more value out of that dredge. So that is the avenue that we are pursuing right now. We have gotten a letter. We are in the process and have been told we are getting a letter of support from the City of Boston Mayor's Office. We have support from the City of Quincy. They have been our partners in drafting this. And our hope is that you will authorize Mike Dennehy to submit the application for design and pre-permitting for the Seaport Economic Council. We should have that submitted on November 1st. And that's all I got for you on that.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you, Ms. Quinn.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Wells, did you want to add anything? Or Ms. Collins?
I just want to thank, oh, God, Melinda, you can go first. I'll speak last.
Okay, well, I did want to note, I think, Ms. Quinn, you mentioned this before, or maybe Mr. Wells, you mentioned it, but I did want to note that the previous grant application was returned with a request to cooperate regionally, which is something that we've been wanting to do as much as we can. The board and Mr. Dennehy to do something regional on this, and so I really appreciate what you did to get Boston and Quincy, and it just is going to be very exciting.
Mr. Wells?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Collins, and also and everyone, the city of Boston, city of Quincy, all of our partners, the Marine, the Harbor Master's Office from Quincy, who actually did the tour for us. And I'll be very brief and simple in that. Brief in this and that. There are two really important factors. One, Madam Chair, from the work at the MPIC and the studies of the MAPC that were done on our part of the river. The environmental aspects of it, the opening it up to access to residents, the Conservation Commission's concerned about the largest smelt hatchery, all those concerns. Also brought in even different concern in the fact that just in their one area, which is called Port Norfolk, which is the first area on the right, which is a very dense area of Dorchester with very limited public transportation. They view it from an economic concern in that they know Quincy, which is just across the river, not even a half a mile away from where they would want to institute, from an economic point of view, water taxes and supporting an additional high-speed ferry to the airport and into downtown Boston. So there's real true benefits to this for all of us. And I really want to thank Allison. And it only ties in with our vote Monday night and the work we're doing in acquiring the 41 Walk property, supporting kayak and cooling, the whole theme of the upstream project that's going to take place, all of that. And Allison, am I premature in mentioning what Tyne Bond mentioned about the sonar scanning being done? Or can I mention that? Or do you want to mention that?
No, feel free. It's been completed and it will be part of our application.
So Tyne Bond advised the three of us that they would have the entire river mapped, sonar mapped, which would show from past dredging and the areas that needed to be dredged, and it would really be, I think it's about a $50,000 cost, which they've absorbed. It would be of no cost to any of the three communities, and it would be part of our soft match for our applications. So it just goes to show the enthusiasm that when you open people's eyes to this, and the one thing that I think we'd like to do is do one more tour for the other members of the board so that you can see this as well, because as you saw, Melinda, unless you actually go out there, and I want to quote one of the city of Quincy's reps who had never been on that river in her life, a long time, environmental, had never been there, and was like shocked when she got out there and saw it from that perspective of being out there. I think we have something here we're well on our way, and Alice, thank you, Tim, for taking the lead. And Marina too, and Marina, we're lucky, because am I right, Alice? She worked for Time Bond, so she speaks the language. Could tell when we were on.
Yes.
She
Yes,
speaks the language.
She's a very big asset to the town.
So that's it, Madam Chair. That's all I really have. I think this is really a good thing. Let's just hope we get this out. I think that this is going to look very good with the three of us applying together.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wells. Anyone else on this topic? Any further discussion?
I think we need a motion to allow. I don't have my agenda. Do we need a motion on this to allow Mr. Dennehy to sign the application?
Ms. Quinn, could you just go over that step again, because we don't have any draft motion this evening.
So if the board is okay with it, I would appreciate that you take a vote to allow Mike Dennehy to sign the application to the Seaport Economic Council for a design and pre-permitting grant application.
I'll make that motion with the replacement word authorize or allowed.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, Mr. Doyle.
Yes.
Mr. Zulus.
Yes.
Ms. Collins.
Yes.
Mr. Wells.
Absolutely, yes.
Myself, yes. Okay, thank you both very much, or all three of you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night, Allison. Okay, 7 and 8 relate to Veterans Day in the Purple Heart community. And let me just see if Kevin Cook is here, our veterans agent. Mr. Cook is on the telephone. Can you hear us, Kevin?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So Mr. Cook was with us at our last meeting, and we now have, we may have had at that time, I had not seen it, but others may have, the language for the Purple Heart Community Proclamation. Is there anything you'd like to add, Mr. Cook, to what you told us the last time regarding the Purple Heart community? Or do any of our members have any questions for Mr. Cook?
Well, Madam Chair, I'm just glad to be here again and glad to ask for your support. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback from the community, and we're compiling names of some of the local Purple Heart veterans who we are going to include in our ceremony.
And Mr. Cook, I think it's fair to say that this is a form of proclamation that a lot of communities are using. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, this is the similar proclamation made by Braintree and Canton and Randolph also, all Purple Heart communities at this time.
Okay, great, thank you. Any comments or questions for Mr. Cook? And if not, would anyone like to move to approve the resolution?
Madam Chair, I will move to approve the Town of Milton, Massachusetts proclamation of a Purple Heart community.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, Mr. Doyle.
Yes.
Mr. Zulus.
Yes.
Ms. Collins.
Yes.
Mr. Wells. You're on mute, Mr. Wells.
My apologies, Madam Chair, yes.
Okay, and myself, yes. Kevin, would you like to just go over again briefly the plans for the Veterans event on November 11th?
Sure. Well, weather conditions being positive, on Thursday, November 11th at 11 o'clock, we will have the Town of Milton Veterans Day ceremony on Town Hall lawn. We are going to have the traditional ceremony that we've had in past years, which we have not been able to have as successful due to the other conditions, but we're going to have the band and the chorus assisting us, and we will be, going over and commemorating this acceptance of the Town of Milton as a Purple Heart community. Our students are going to participate and assist us with the reading of the names of those who are going to be there on the list that we have. And we do encourage our citizens, if you are related to a Purple Heart veteran or you know of one, please get in touch with my office so we can include them on the list. I put out another request to the papers, and I'm going to put some social media out too for the same, because we'd like to have a representative list. This will not be A to Z list of all the Purple Heart veterans that ever existed in Milton. That would be a vast undertaking, but we would like to have a representative list that we can read of those who would like to be remembered by residents of our community.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything for Mr. Cook? And we'll just encourage members of the community to take part in the ceremony on November the 11th at 11 a.m. All right, thank you very much.
And if there is any weather condition or weather issue, Madam Chair, the default would always be back to the Council on Aging building, of course.
Okay, great. All right, thank you for your report this evening. And thank you for the work on the Purple Heart community, Kevin.
No, thank you for your unanimous support. I could not be prouder than to be part of the Milton community. I'm a guy from Canton who's now, feels very at home in Milton, and I really appreciate all the support that your select board and all the citizens give us in the town of Milton.
Okay, thank you. Have a good evening.
You too, Madam Chair.
As I said, item 9 is going to need to be deferred, and the town administrator is trying to set up a Monday daytime meeting for that contract for the fire project. I am recused on that matter, so I will not be at that meeting unless we add anything else to the agenda. But with the board's consent, why don't we defer items 10, 11, and 12 until later in the evening and move on to 13 and 14. Is it agreeable to everyone? Okay, I'm hearing no opposition, then why don't we do that? So we'll move up to item 13, which is a discussion follow-up on runway 4R flight path claims. We had some comments at Citizen Speak on this. We could, as we did the last time, combine the public comment response with, which is 19, with item 13. And I'll open it up to the board if anyone would like to address the issue. I see Mr. Doherty is our Massport CAC representative, and thank you for joining us tonight, Mr. Doherty. I didn't realize you were going to be here, but I appreciate you taking the time. So thank you. Since you're here, if you'd like to say anything, or Mr. Zulus, or I may weigh in, but I'd like to defer to you at the beginning.
I'm happy to start unless you want, Tom. Tom, if you want to go, I can wait. Okay, so so here we are again. 2 weeks ago, we addressed some of the misinformation that was being spread about this. And the only reason this is on the agenda tonight is that concerns were raised with us about a subsequent meeting, the meeting, I guess, that Judith Gunderson referenced, where concerns were raised with us about inaccurate information and misleading slides of near truths and half-truth information, and that concern was raised, and what was sought was some kind of step by this board, whether it be a meeting or a statement. So the question was whether we have a meeting and answer questions, or whether we have a statement to try to again address some of the misinformation. Let me just say again, for over a year, we have been advocating for the 3 RNP paths as alternative paths. And those flight paths go over parts of Quincy, parts of Hingham, and parts of Braintree. That didn't change on September 23rd when I spoke on behalf of this board to Massport and to the MIT group when I advocated for those three paths. As we have advocated for those 3 paths for the last year. It didn't change in our letter of October 1st when we talked about the alternative plans, paths, and those paths that would reduce the overflight noise from the RNEV for our RNEV concentration. And to make abundantly clear that what we were talking about were those three paths, we included the same statement that I made, and this is all repeating what we've said before, but we included a written version of the same statement with that letter that I made on September 23rd, again, advocating for the three paths. So we all understand that we've been advocating for that. Massport understands that, and in subsequent discussions, that's been clarified to make sure that they still understand that, and they still understand that it's those three paths that we've been advocating for. So I'm not sure how much more there is to say on this, except we've seen this movie before. This happened before on runway 27 when, Ms. Gunderson and Ms. Christensen said that we were trying to bring more planes over Milton. They said, Ms. Gunderson printed a letter and said that we had agreed to an FAA request that would change the departure path from Boston neighborhoods to fly over Milton. That never happened. And just like that never happened then, it never happened that we have advocated for an additional flight path over East Milton. As I said, this movie has been going on for 2.5 years from Ms. Christensen and Ms. Gunderson, and I have no doubt that it will continue. There's plenty to criticize about this board. There's plenty to disagree with. We as volunteers on behalf of the town accept criticism and accept disagreement. But there's no need to make things up and to piece together pieces of letters to try to tell us what we were saying when we understand what we were saying and Massport understands what we were saying. So I hope that's clear, but that's where we are. And the question was based on the concerns that have been raised with us, whether we put out some kind of statement to address the misinformation as was brought to our attention from this meeting, or whether we have our own, public session where we let people, have people come in and just repeat again what we've repeated over and over again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zulus. Mr. Doherty?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. And if the assistant can help me to put up a couple of slides, I think that would help as well, because I appreciate the opportunity to we store some understanding of what we discussed October of 2020. For those, and I'll be brief, but for those who did not attend that October 2020 update, October 6th, it's on Milton Access TV. I noticed that only 17 people had viewed it, or viewers had looked at it in the last year, other than the 3 times I did. It's also, the slides for it are also on the website at the index titled October 6, 2020 in the Massport Community Advisory Committee section. So is it possible to
yes.
share it? Yes?
Yes.
Oh, okay, so I will hit share screen, I guess.
Yep.
Good. Thank you. So let me just first state that, as we know, there is not now, nor has there ever been, a plan to put more planes over East Milton, not by rotation and not by any other means. Now, what we are trying to do and have been trying to do is to restore the overflight noise burden sharing with the other municipalities that previously had shared it with us before the concentration, right? And what does that mean? And I know the first of these will be repetitive, but now, can you see that, or is it somehow blocked there?
It's not up yet, Mr.
No, I haven't seen it, Tom. I have given you the
wait,
privilege.
here you go. How's that?
Okay.
There we go.
Is that
Yes,
good?
we have it.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So what we mean by restoring the overflight burden is you're looking at it. This is a slide from 2009 of planes as they are arriving on, as you see on the left side here, 4R, and there's also, and then you'll see 4L also referenced at the top. And you'll see the spread and dispersion. And what we want to do, and what I've been trying to do for 2.5 years, is to get the census block data that is applicable to that dispersed flight burden, so that that can be compared with the RNAV burden. And as you know, what we have now, if I can go to the next piece here, yes. So this is the RNAV. This is 4R, and 4L is proposed over here. So that narrow line, as we know, I would like to be able to compare that noise burden with the noise burden here, right? And we've been asking for that data, and this MIT study is about to finish. So one of the things we have been doing is to say, before this finishes, I would like to get the comparative data there, because it hasn't been a comparative data of that type that has been provided in so far. Now, let me put the next. Yeah. The discussion with respect to the, there we go. The discussion with respect to the dispersion of the paths. If you look here, this is the MIT slide, feasible 4R tracks based on Milton, and the word there that's obscured on the side is request. This was a reference now, and you see in green WP1, that line? Okay, I want to read you MIT's own wording, quoting what they say was accurately our request. The RNP track, and RNP is a curved, that means required navigational performance. Only 65%, but that's a good number, of the planes, the commercial aircraft can fly that. The straight line path can be flown by essentially all commercial airlines, and I'll come back to that. But that path is, as it says, and I want to read this slowly. The RNP track green is the route requested for analysis by Milton. Let me read that again. This is what we requested. And we wanted a route that would be a mirror image of the JetBlue visual RNAV, which is over here. They don't show it on this, but that was essentially equivalently from the West. As you may remember, 2015, 2017, in that time frame, without an environmental assessment, temporarily, JetBlue was allowed by the FAA to fly into runway 4L, or left, on a path that essentially goes there, okay? Then they say, as an RNAV, it doesn't meet the criteria for RNAV procedures. The criteria for RNAV procedures you'll see in the magenta path, and please keep in mind, I'm going to be referring to this green path and the magenta path. That magenta path, if you look at the difference between 35 and 20, there's a 15-degree angle difference between the existing RNAV path, which is in white, and then it multicolors. That's the existing RNAV path. And the one that then, without our request for such a path, MIT said, well, it doesn't, it can't be RNAV if it has this waypoint, they call it waypoint 2, and could only be implemented in an RNP procedure. So that's why they put the green path forward, and we embrace that. This path then goes, as you can see, in working backwards, Marina Bay, down North Quincy, and downward. That is one of the three paths that we have, Milton has supported as a method of adding a string to the harp and adding some rotation, not necessarily in substitution. And that would be restoring burden sharing by other municipalities. Okay, you with me so far? So what are, and just to say it again, our request was for a mirror image of the JetBlue, and this is exactly what we requested, but they said it couldn't be done as an RNAV path. Fine. This next I can speed up. So here they are with regard to the RNP approach. And we support this. And one of the things that they do, as we've said many times, is they then compare the, it's hard to see because of the, maybe I can put this down. Can you now see this red box?
Yes, we can, Tom.
Okay, fine. Thank you, Madam Chair. So what they do is they compare the existing RNAV population exposure with the alternative path, saying, well, Quincy, if it's over that way, there'll be 18,000 more people affected by this path. But what we've asked them for years is, no, we'd like to understand the population exposure before. That's that blue. What is the population exposure across that blue slide I showed earlier? And that's the repeated request for data that as we speak, I've had some progress from Massport saying, look, that would require not just MIT, but its consultant and Massport's consultant to get together to get that kind of data. But we can't guarantee it, but we are trying to undertake to deal with that. In other words, I'm going back to that blue slide versus that RNP, I'm sorry, that RNAV corridor, SkyRail, and saying for the first time after years of requesting it and before they finish, we may get that data. Next. Let's see. Yeah. And then, as you know, we also support the path that goes, I would call it over Howe's Neck, that has fewer people affected. It is an RNP path as well. This is the second of the paths that we support. And then next. Over Hingham, 20,000 fewer people affected. Now, if you've counted so far, how many paths have there been that MIT identified as flyable? 4. And so we didn't say 3, we said that MIT identified 4 paths. Do we support that path that essentially goes, that magenta path, which I'll come to in a moment? No, but we have to be accurate in saying what it is that they identified. It would be incorrect to say they only identified 3 that were flyable, that are applicable. So that's important. So let me now go here. Okay. Yeah, Madam Chair, are you able to see this slide here that has a black line?
Yes, we can see that, Tom.
All right, that's my line. What I did is I went back to a year ago, more than a year ago, I went back to MIT and said, look, we understand you've put the green line, which is an RNP path, curved. Thank you very much. And we also thank you for the lines over RNP over Howe's Neck and Hingham. And this is all in the October 6, 2020 presentation in a much longer time frame. That took more than an hour. And I would refer you to, for example, minute 33 and 55 seconds where I started this discussion and talked about the black line, which I'm going to do now, and the fact that I asked MIT to address this, and I'll tell you more about it. And then an hour and 3 minutes and 55 seconds where we went through the fact that Milton does not advocate the magenta line a year ago. And what is this line? If you go to that presentation, you'll see that MIT has a diagram of how close to the airport or far from the airport the waypoint there can be for an RNAV path and what its angle can be. So here you have a 15-degree angle, but it's 4.65 nautical miles. If you know where Granite Avenue and the expressway, Granite Ave and the expressway entrance is, that there you are. Here, what I said was, look, if you can do this 15-degree path and you take the same angle at 15 degrees, I know I'm not an aeronautical expert, but I also know from your diagram that you can have it as few as 2.5 nautical miles. At 2.5 nautical miles, you could have, why couldn't you have an RNAV? Why would that be better, or at least helpful? Because there are 50% more planes that can fly the RNAV than can fly the RNP. So in the comment period, and thank you very much, earlier tonight, there was a reference to the July 2021 letter, July 9, 2021 letter, and on page 3, and there's an excerpt from it that was presented. It talks about the JetBlue analog RNAV. This black is the JetBlue RNAV analog, not the magenta. It is this that is referred to there. Why? Because as the paragraph says, we would like to get the data for this. That is to say, before and after data for the 3 RNP paths, but also for this one. The response so far has been, well, if we can give you that comparison between the existing RNAV and that blue area, it would be duplicative or otherwise more work for us to be also going one by one, the green, the black, the house neck, and the Hingham. Understandably, I've been getting some pushback with respect to doing it in one manner, and we'll see what happens with regard to the other. But let me say it, this would be over Marina Bay, North Quincy, and to the east of Milton, not in Milton, and certainly not in East Milton, which we've never wanted. They volunteered that as a modality that works, and they say it's viable. Thank you. All right, I think I've got the points across in terms of what we're trying to do, and I appreciate that perhaps in reading the letter, and people didn't have in mind, that the waypoint is at 2.5 nautical miles. By the way, they have not stated that that's viable. That's why I say we have 4 flyable paths that are identified, one of which we don't want, and 3 of which we're advocating. And this one, we've asked them, can this, because it can be flown by more planes, be a possible one? And they say there is they don't explain exactly where, but there's a tower that could be problematical. To which my response is, let's get the data anyway, because radio towers are changed, the companies merge, they consolidate, they shift their business. If I didn't ask for this and we didn't have it, and then things changed, we might wish we had, and the data collection is closing down. I guess, I think I should stop there. I think that's my attempt to kind of lay out where we are and what we're advocating, and where we're not, and what we're not advocating.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Doherty and Mr. Zulus. I'll just add very briefly, I took some notes, but I was writing in shorthand, so I hope I got this accurate. But what I heard Ms. Gunderson say during public comment was that other towns had rejected the paths over the Quincy, Braintree, Hingham, and that leaves by default paths over Milton. So if that's the understanding, that is not correct. Other towns may have weighed in opposition, but that's not the final word. We're continuing to advocate for those paths. Ultimately, the FAA will make this determination, and the fact that some other communities have weighed in, that should not be viewed as determinative, and meaning that the only default is over Milton. In some of the comments that I've seen on Facebook relate to 4L. I think everybody understands, but for the benefit of anyone who's new to town or new to the discussion, MIT has repeatedly made clear when that question about 4L has come up, that 4L is not what they're looking at in terms of dispersing flights from 4R. 4L is subject to an environmental assessment that's pending. We've spent an awful lot of time filing comments a year ago on that. That is a different flight path, different parallel runway, raises a lot of other issues, but it is not being considered by MIT. And so the Facebook chatter about 4L really is not appropriate. MIT has repeatedly struck that down and said that's, you wouldn't disperse to the west of 4R because you're going to run right into 4L, and that's just a different path. And it's not under consideration in the Block 2. It's not under consideration in the MIT study at all, but Block 2 is what's currently pending, and it is not part of Block 2. I know that question has been raised. We've seen it raised at the MIT presentations, and MIT has repeatedly made that clear. So the only other thing I would add is just to echo what Mr. Zulus added last week, that, you know, this is a hard issue, and we're up against a federal bureaucracy. This is one town, and there are many towns in Massachusetts and many communities around the country impacted by next gen at different airports. And we really need to be working in unison. And I hope that will be the case going forward, and that we've clarified any questions that people have. But this is a hard issue, and we're one community. And ultimately, the FAA is going to have to solve this problem, but it doesn't help the cause when we have division within a community. But we need to be rowing in the same direction here, and I hope we're all going to be on the same team going forward. So we've said that ad nauseum, but sometimes it bears repeating. Mr. Doherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just add that we're not alone. One of the most significant departure runways at Logan is runways called 33 left. Cambridge, Arlington, Belmont, Medford, Malden, Somerville, hundreds of thousands of people under that, and without an MIT proffered dispersion modality as we speak, just as here, and I don't want to get people overly hopeful. Here, the opposition by Quincy, Braintree, and Hingham is such that with regard to the MCAC itself, forwarding any kind of effort to have any of those three paths to be accepted, I think is just unrealistic. I think what similarly the 33L and we can be advocating, all those communities and we, that somehow or other the FAA be requested to reprioritize and rebudget the way in which MIT has then said, here are the things that would be required in order for dispersion to happen. There'd have to be in some instances some pilot training. There'd have to be some air traffic control training, and there'd have to be a policy within the FAA to prioritize to the degree that they haven't at all. Finding resolution here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Zulus?
I'll just add, it's a good point that Tom raises. We knew from last October that it would be a heavy lift to get a concerted effort by the South Shore communities because we are the community that's affected. And so the status quo favors those communities. And so to the extent that there's a change to the status quo, then they may not see that to their benefit. So we knew it was a heavy lift. But regardless, we've tried, and we've reached out, and we've tried with Congressman Lynch, and Congressman Lynch responded to our efforts and has assisted our efforts. And so our hope is that while it may not work with the MCAC because of the politics that Tom pointed out, ultimately the decision maker here is the FAA, and we'll continue to press these alternatives with the FAA and try to make it happen that way. There's been a lot of effort that's gone into this, and particularly Tom and yourself, Madam Chair, and so we'll just keep working it and trying to improve things. We've gotten some advantage over the last 2 years. We got a good result on runway 27. We did get these three paths identified, which was a lot of work on Tom's part, particularly by him working with MIT. So we've had some advance, but we just need to keep working on
it. This is not an easy issue, but Tom, thank you. We're grateful for your efforts, and thank you for coming in this evening and walking through that explanation. Does any member of the board have a comment or a question? Ms. Collins.
I just wanted to say thank you as well, and also to say that I found this very useful because we heard what some of the confusion was before Mr. Doherty started his explanation. And then you and Mr. Zulus, Madam Chair, also, I think, followed up by pointing out what the misunderstanding could be, or one of the misunderstandings. So I really appreciate that, and I'm hopeful.
Thank you. Okay, my sense is, Mike, you had started off at the beginning saying, should we have another public meeting or a discussion or a statement? I think this evening's discussion has provided a lot of information. I'm not sure we need to do anything beyond this, but what is your sense? And what is the sense of the board?
I mean, my sense is similar to yours, Madam Chair, but we'll see what happens. And if we have to explain it again, we'll explain it again.
Okay. Is that agreeable to everyone? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Good night, Tom.
That brings us to item 14, which is, and I asked if our town council, Kevin Freitag, would be available to join us for this discussion. This is the discussion and vote on a request for proposals for 334 Edge Hill Road. This is the lease of the former East Milton Library building, and a potential new request for proposals and what the process for that would be. Just see, this is a different
Madam
format.
Chair, he's joining us right now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Dennehy. So while Mr. Freitag is joining us, let me just good evening, Kevin. Thank you for coming in. Just briefly, and then, and whatever I get wrong, Mr. Freitag can correct. The board went out for proposal. We submitted an RFP, request for proposals, put the site of the East Milton Library out to bid sometime in the spring. Because the lease with the Milton Arts Center, which was a 10-year lease, was expiring, and we needed to go back out to bid under the state bidding laws. We did go through a bid, we put out the RFP. We had one bid submitted by the Milton Arts Center. We then engaged in discussions and negotiation with that bidder, and issues were raised on both sides. And further along we've come to the conclusion that where we are brings us outside of what the scope of the RFP was in some respects. So the next step here would be, or the appropriate step, if the board is so inclined, and we can discuss this, would be to submit to reject the bid that we got, even though we were getting pretty close with the Arts Center, and to put the property back out for bid. Mr. Freitag thinks that could be done fairly quickly, and see, what the bidding process is. There may only be one bid again, but the RFP would be somewhat different than the previous RFP was, to address issues that have come up during the negotiations. So that's what's on for discussion this evening. And Mr. Freitag has been dealing with the attorney for the Arts Center. I've spoken a few times with Joan Clifford, Mr. Doyle, and I sat down with her a few weeks ago and went over some of the issues. And one thing that I mentioned this afternoon, when Joan had mentioned that there's a lot of uncertainty if the Arts Center doesn't have a lease, and they want to schedule events and programming. And the question for us might be, do we want to pick a date that's a little bit farther out that would give the Arts Center a little bit more definitive time in which they could plan, say a 3-month or a 4-month window, knowing that we've got to go through the process. They might want to schedule some events. And what I heard back was that the winter is not their busiest season, the summer is. So I think there may be some benefit to picking a date at which the property would be available, if there were a bidder other than the Arts Center that's successful on the next round, and there may not be. But that may not have a lot of value, but it might have something. So I wanted to report that out. So Mr. Freitag, please feel free to weigh in and add what you'd like to, or correct anything that I've said wrong. You're on mute, Mr. Freitag.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kevin Freitag from the Office of Town Council. I don't have anything to add to what you said. I think you covered it quite well.
Okay, so open for discussion from the floor. Any members would like to weigh in? Mr. Wells.
That was good, Madam Chair. You can see me more. Could you sense me moving that mouse?
I can see if someone unmutes, I can see, and I know that means they're ready to speak.
So, you know, I'm a huge supporter of our current tenant. I think they're a great asset to the community. She did call me today. She's very concerned about going back out. She said it's an immense difficulty for her to have to do this. Not to even mention some of the topics that you mentioned that I hadn't even thought of. So my thought is, if we can work this out, then I would really strongly urge town council to try and work this out without having to go out to an RFP. I mean, to me, we've been talking about one thing that we wanted to add. That's the thing she agreed to it today when I spoke to her. I just don't see, I think it's an immense difficulty. And I really believe in that conversation today that we perhaps run the risk of not just the difficulty it creates for them, that we perhaps lose them, and that's not good for any of us.
I'll let Mr. Freitag respond to that. My understanding is that it's a public property, so if we're a little bit too far beyond the RFP initially, then we have to be mindful of the fact that other bidders may have bid if they had known some different terms. So to err on the side of caution, we would need to go back up to bid. But Mr. Freitag.
Again, Kevin Freitag from the Office of Town Council, and I think the chair just summed it up again pretty well. My concern is that where we are in the negotiations is materially different than where we were when we issued the RFP. And that's the standard that would cause for a reset. And I think that that's appropriate. One thing that the chair and I spoke about today was the fact that the RFP documents are going to be pretty similar to what they were the first time they went out, with maybe one or two exceptions that address sort of the issues that came up during negotiations, but it should be similar to what went out the first time with those two are exceptions, I guess.
Mr. Zulus.
So just so I understand, is it fair to say that there's no disagreement on substance here? It's just a question of what the legal requirement is. And if the legal requirement is we have to do it in order to get what everyone agrees to, I guess and I understand it's difficult and all that, but if it's a legal requirement but it's part of the process to get where everyone wants to get, I guess I don't understand what the and I understand it's hard and everything, but if it's a legal requirement, we just got to go through the process, seems to me.
Any other comments or questions? Ms. Collins.
So I think what I'm hearing is, and it's been a little while since we've talked about this. So as Mr. Zulus just said, because we've been negotiating for back and forth, things are a little bit out of bounds of the original RFP. And so we need to just reissue that RFP. And yes, it's true that somebody else might come and bid, but we need to do this regardless. Correct?
I just don't understand why we have to do it now. Why, we've been discussing this for weeks and now we have to put another RFP. I just don't understand that. Neither does she.
Well, I spoke with Joan late afternoon, Richard. I'm not sure what time you talked with her. It may have been before I spoke with her, but Kevin, could you answer that question?
Yes, based on where things sort of ended up, as you might recall, the issue that was sort of central at this point was parking. And it seems to me that based on sort of what has been proposed and then the counter proposal that was made by the MAC regarding sort of what would be done regarding the parking, and then some other sort of concessions that would be made in addition to the parking, it's just not what was included in the RFP. And if someone had picked up that RFP and said, well, there's going to be parking in the back of this building, maybe someone else would have bid. And to just answer your question, Mr. Wells, it's hard to draw a specific line sometimes in these things, sort of where it crosses from being materially different than the RFP. But in my opinion, we're sort of outside of that line at this point. And just to be on the safe side here, it seems to me that the right approach is to put it back out to bid with these, this issue addressed, as well as some of the maintenance and repair issues that were other big issues that sort of came up along the way in the negotiations that I think could be hammered out and put into a sort of a revised lease that would be attached to the RFP. We sort of already troubleshot those issues, and now we'll be able to deal with them in a clean fashion by way of a new RFP.
Ms. Collins? And then Mr. Zulus.
Thank you. So I thought it was more around those issues around maintenance, that was the reason we needed to do this. I don't think we have a recommendation from the Traffic Commission at the moment for parking. So I guess I'm wondering.
Traffic Commission doesn't have jurisdiction on off public ways. They only have jurisdiction on public ways.
Okay.
It's really up to us. That would come under our purview with whatever input you got from like the DPW and the town engineer who actually designed that. That came from the town engineer.
Okay. And
So back to Ms. Collins and then Mr. Zulus.
Then I am a bit confused because I thought the Traffic Commission was looking at this, but I suppose only with regard to the street that would be affected.
Yes.
We haven't voted on this, I don't think, have we?
No.
Okay, yeah. So just to Mr. Wells's point about
Mr. Zulus.
So the parties, if the parties are in agreement, then it's in both parties' interest to do it the right way. And if town council is saying, look, this is the way we need to do it to actualize the agreement between the parties, and I get it. It's a process. We need to go through the process, but I guess I don't get the issue. I mean, it's just we have an agreement. Let's go through the process and get it done.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I think the issue for the Art Center is they're a small nonprofit and they don't have a large staff. So admittedly, it will create additional work for the Art Center. Presumably, a lot of the material that was submitted for the RFP in the spring could be reused. And hopefully that's the case. But any other comments or questions? And when we say rejected bid, we're not, that should be viewed negatively as though it's some kind of a comment on the arts or the applicant. It just means that we have to go back out for bid because we've moved beyond the stage of the initial what was in the initial RFP on a couple of issues. And to be on the safe side, we're going to go back out to bid. We may or may not get other bidders on a second round. If there's no discussion, would anyone like to make a motion? And I think the motion would be to reject the pending bid received from the Milton Arts Center and to put the property at 334 Edge Hill Road back out for bid for lease.
So I'll make the motion, Madam Chair. Based on the discussions between the parties and the understandings between the parties, I'll make a motion to reject the bid and to put the bid back out for proposal.
I'll second the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Anything you wanted to add, Mr. Freitag? We may have covered everything. Okay. Then all in favor, Mr. Doyle?
Yes.
Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Ms. Collins?
yes.
Mr. Wells?
No.
And myself, yes. Okay, thank you. So I think the next step then would be for Mr. Freitag to revise the RFP and the lease that would be attached to the RFP and to bring this back for discussion at a future meeting at which we would approve the RFP and then it would be issued and we go through the process.
And Madam Chair, my understanding is that your next, unless there's, the next scheduled board meeting is the 10th of November. Is that correct?
It is. In fact, I was going to bring that up under future agenda items. If the 10th still works for everyone, we still need to come up with a second November date. So the 10th, that is our next scheduled meeting, Kevin, unless someone has.
I will aim to have the RFP in your hands before that date so that it could be approved that night.
Okay, that'd be great if you can. We know there's an awful lot on your plate right now, but if you can, that would be helpful. Okay. All right, thank you. Then we're back to item 10, which is a discussion and an update on our October 25th special town meeting 2 nights ago. We've usually put this on our agenda in recent times after a town meeting, just to have any follow-up conversation about it amongst the board. I think we got several important things move forward at the town meeting, in particular the broadband article and 41 Wharf Street article. An awful lot of work has gone into both of those, but it's nice to see those supported overwhelmingly by town meeting members and to have those projects advance to the next steps. It was nice that it only took one night. Anyone, any follow-up on the town meeting? Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is for Town Council. I've already mentioned this to him. As the board knows, the article for 41 Wharf that was approved requires a vote of 88 Wharf LLC. I think it's very important that we get this done sooner versus later. The landing subcommittee have already started to look at developing a new RFP for the property. But I don't want this to linger because you'll be into another whole boating season, summer comes quickly. Even though the boats are coming out now, as you know, when we do our calendars here, we go through chunks of years like they're a 60-minute television show. So I think it's important that we get on this, getting the vote and getting this rectified sooner versus later.
Yeah, I agree. And the other steps are the modification of the permits. So
absolutely, there's some steps that have to be taken, and it's going to take some time. So I don't think we want to let this sit.
Yeah, and I think the lead on that is the condo association, but the language in the MOA requires us to support an application to the planning board. Yes. And for the Chapter 91 license. So I'm sure Mr. Freitag will be having some follow-up with Attorney Corcoran for the condo association on those items. Anything else regarding the town meeting?
Madam Chair, I will just say, with respect to the design and construction of the INET, as was part of the presentation, the next step for the broadband committee is to seek ARPA funding to put us in a position to create an RFP for design and construction. So I anticipate that will be discussed by the Finance Committee Friday. And so I would anticipate that being on the agenda, or asking that be on the agenda for our next meeting, consideration of using ARPA funds for that purpose.
Okay. Mr. Doyle.
I would just add, Mike, if I may, that if Mr. Dennehy has other possible projects that we'd want to have them as early as possible for the Friday meeting as well. We have only $440,000 that we can make a determination on ourselves. Any other projects beyond what that would be allocated for at this time have to go through an application process with Norfolk County. And we are uncertain as to the time of that bidding and so on down the line yet, because it's all new, but early in, hopefully early out.
That's going to bring us into our next agenda item, which is the finance report. But is there anything else on the town meeting before we get into that a little more broadly? I know Mr. Dennehy will keep us updated on the hiring of the 2 police positions, which is good news. And the funding for the schools and the library was also good news the other night. And, going forward, if there is going to be a winter town meeting, I'm sure the moderator and we will want to have a conversation on whether we keep it on Zoom. I've heard from a few town meeting members that it's not the same as being in person. Now, we've said that before, and the moderator conducted a survey and found that a lot of the survey respondents wanted to stay on Zoom for this meeting. Maybe that'll be the case in the winter if we have a winter meeting. I'm personally hopeful that we'll be able to get back in person in May, but we'll see where COVID goes and stands. But another topic for discussion at a later date. All right, well, why don't we go into the Finance Committee's report then? We have 3 items on the ARPA funding, CARES Act, and the FY23 budget. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Zulus.
So, Madam Chair, thank you. Not much to report. We're going to consider ARPA a request, I believe, on Friday. After that, it'll be our recommendation to go through the same process that we have previously, which would be to conduct a public hearing to hear from residents. And so if the Finance Committee, I can't remember if we had the hearing for the residents before, I believe it was before this board considered possible funding. So it's possible that what we could do is have our Finance Committee meeting on Friday, and then if we're in a position, perhaps have a public meeting next week in advance of this board's meeting, the week thereafter, to get to solicit resident feedback. To Arthur's point, first in, first out, we do want to move along, but we want to make sure we get sufficient, and we want to make sure we get as much feedback as we can from the residents. So that's the idea, really, is to talk about some of these possible appropriations in finance, then have a public meeting either before or after our next meeting, and then to have this board consider allocations. And so I don't know, Mr. Dennehy, I think that's where we are on ARPA. You may have more to add, but I think that's where we are on ARPA, at least for the next Finance Committee meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Zulus. Thank you, Mr. Doyle, Madam Chair. Yeah, so the 25% of the, in addition to the $444,000 that member Vice Chair Doyle mentioned, we also have access to and availability to, through the application process through the Norfolk County Commissioners, another $1.299 million. That's 25% of our allotment, net minus 3%, net of 3% of the administrative costs that the county is using for. They've hired Clifton, Larson, Allen as their auditors to work through this process. Additionally, they're taking an admin fee to do some countywide projects. So I agree with both members Zulus and Vice Chair Doyle. I think we should get a project to Director Cronin as soon as possible for 2 reasons. We do have shovel-ready projects that have been presented by many departments in town. And I'd really like to test the system at Norfolk County just to see what it will take. We've vetted it. The Director of Finance, Karen Paval, and myself have vetted a lot of these projects with Brendan Sweeney at the Mass DOR to make sure that they qualify. It's just a matter of presenting them to the Finance Committee Friday morning and subsequently, sooner rather than later, to this full board. There is a small project I will present on Friday that the Parks and Recreation Commission is looking to fund. It's very timely. We can get into that on Friday, but that is the gist of it. So you hit the nail on the head. But I would like to tap into that $1.3 million as soon as possible. And that's just an application process through Norfolk County after this executive board signs off on it.
Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dennehy, going back to Mr. Zulus's comment about getting additional public input, we had some minor thought about having a place on the website where people could input ideas as well. Is that something that's feasible?
Yeah. So at our last meeting, thanks for bringing this up, Vice Chair. Karen Paval and Rob Mallet, our IT director, have been working on the dashboard for the town. We did take some input last Friday from the members on the Joint Finance Committee meeting, what it would look like. One of the things that we're also going to do is put a suggestion box in that. So basically, it's still beta, but it was tested or deployed and presented, not deployed, but rather shown to that finance subcommittees and how it should look. Ultimately, it'll be the decision of this board. I'd like to show it once again to the Finance Committee on Friday. We've made some additions and corrections to that yesterday, but one of the buckets will be constituent engagement and suggested projects, and a place for those that can come in either to myself or the director of finance or the chair of the finance committee or the chair of this board or a multitude of people. But the idea is that we don't necessarily have to have a public meeting for people to submit stuff, but that they can continue to submit it and then be presented to the finance committee and the full board to be heard.
Thank you. Great.
In terms of the scheduling for opera and the public meeting, would it be possible to do it at the same meeting so that we'd have the public meeting is maybe the first hour or a half hour, depending on how many people there are of our meeting, and then go into a regular meeting? Or is there a reason that you want to have it on a separate night? That is there benefit to the finance committee from that?
I don't think there's any magic about having it on a separate night. I think I think we set aside an hour. We may have set aside 2 hours on the prior one, but I don't think we went more than an hour. So yeah, I mean, I think if I would set aside an hour to make sure we get as much input from residents as we could, and that would be, that before was interactive when we did it before in August. So yeah, I think doing it before our general meeting, I think that would work fine. Maybe we start at 6:30 or 6 and do it that way. But yeah, I think that'd be fine.
I mean, just to follow up, the reason I'm asking is there may not be as many people. The people who came in at the last meeting said affordable housing and road street lights. They've made those points, so they may not come back to remake the same points. So we may or may not have started at a follow-up meeting.
And part of it too, Madam Chair, if I may, was to present what we were looking at too, so people could react to that. And so I envision that to be the same, because we in the public meeting we had before, we talked about the sewer project, and we laid it out and people could react to it. So I envision the same thing here. If we have a number of suggestions, then we lay them out and then we solicit comment. And I think before our meeting, as I said, from my perspective, that'd be fine.
Okay, Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to let you know, in this case, I 100% agree. I think that to streamline it, get it moving, and maximize efficiency of time here, I think setting an hour aside a regular meeting. That way, if anyone seems that our meetings get a lot of people anyway, so it may actually draw people that are coming here for another reason as well. Two birds with one stone. So
okay,
that's a great idea. Let's do it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to just give an update on the housing front. We don't have the qualified census tracts that are called for in the final interim guidance. I love that term. But that being said, the Housing Authority may have some maintenance / very overdue renovation requests, and we've been trying to see if they do have something, just to let you know. But I suggested that maybe Ms. Praval might be a good person to talk to and had connected them with Mr. Zawinski. So I just wanted to let everybody know that I realized that, the money that came directly to the town is, as Mr. Doyle noted, it's, it's being well allocated. And hopefully if there's, nothing left there, we could apply through that grant-like process that the county's going to have.
Okay, Mr. Dennehy.
Just one last thing, and I appreciate all of the time and energy that has been spent on this. I really think that this board has done a very good job of hearing shovel-ready projects, and I would suggest perhaps having a meeting next week to hear that and get something submitted to Norfolk County prior to November 10th. I really think that the work that's been done since July by this board, both with the public comment and the stuff we've received from our department heads, we really have some shovel-ready stuff that would qualify. And I think that we should tap into the Norfolk County money sooner rather than later. Understanding this isn't just a rush to spend the money, but there's some opportunity cost if we don't get in sooner rather than later. And just understand that there is other money coming next year for other projects that may need a little more time to bake. So if I might suggest, and again, completely up to this board, but maybe a meeting next week to host again for public comment, and then maybe present something that we could this time next week or a week from Friday, perhaps submit something to Norfolk County.
How does Wednesday 3rd sound for everyone in the evening? So does that mean that we would, all right, so does that mean we would have the public meeting on the 3rd then and not have it for the first hour of our meeting on the 10th? I don't know if that's too soon for the Finance Committee.
I think, if I may, Madam Chair, let's plan for it and let's see if the Finance Committee gets through it on Friday. But I would schedule it and start. The only thing about next week, as I thought about it, is publicizing it. I mean, I guess it gives us a week to try to publicize it. Probably better for us to publicize it before Friday. So I guess where I'm kind of thinking about this real time here. So maybe what we do is, if we want to do it next week, if we think it's important to move along, we just start publicizing it tomorrow, and then it'll be up to the Finance Committee to put up, to be ready to go.
Yeah, I think we should advertise.
I'm sure Arthur will be ready. I'm sure Arthur will be ready. It's just me. He's going to drag me along.
I think for the town email channel and Facebook and Twitter, the town accounts, if we put out the word that way, that's probably enough time. It's almost a week. Okay. Next, we have the CARES Act, and we also have the operating budget for FY23.
Yeah, no real update on either. We're going to talk about CARES Act, I think, on Friday to get an update. Mr. Dennehy may have an update on that. FY23 is really premature. I don't think we're even going to discuss that on Friday. That's going to be a November item because we really don't have much on that at this point. And, we'll be waiting on department budgets. We'll be waiting on free cash to see where we are on revenue. So I don't think we'll have much on that to report. And then CARES Act, again, we're going to talk about that on Friday, but Mr. Dennehy may have something on that he can preview for us.
Yeah, I thought that what we were going to try to do is give some kind of guidance so that when Mr. Dennehy has his department head meeting, that there's some word to put out to the departments in terms of what they should be looking at. Are they submitting one budget? Are they submitting a budget that has, level dollar or rather levels getting late, level service, minus 1%, or are there, and it's too early probably to know those numbers, Are we looking at just a
Right.
level, which I think that's what Mr. Dennehy might be looking for. And so if it's not on Friday's agenda, maybe it's something the Finance Committee could take up soon. Mr. Dennehy.
Yeah, and thank you, Madam Chair. Karen Paval and I, understanding that it's early and in the year, she's going to focus on the capital improvement and put a meeting together of that very important committee for the second week in November. With respect to the department head meeting on this coming Monday, we're basically just going to ask department heads to start working on their salary and wages sheets. As you all know, having been through this a lot, that's the majority of our budget in town. That's where most of our resources go. It's her first go around with salaries and wages and the warrants, so she just wants to qualify all that and take a good look at that. So that's a very good starting point for Monday's meeting. We can get deeper into it with this board about more specifics later, but ultimately it's get the capital improvement group off the ground second week of November, and then talk about salary and wages Monday so we can start getting some of that stuff compiled.
Okay, and I think we're going to have a conversation about level service or what we want the department heads to submit for FY23. Mr. Doyle and then Mr. Wells.
Madam Chair, I've spoken once already. Let Richard go and then come back to me. That's fine.
Okay, Mr. Wells. You're on mute, Richard.
Want to put the hand down before I speak, so I don't leave it up. Am I correct? Most of our labor contracts are done 7/1 or 6/30 of 22. Am I correct?
Correct. Yep, all 7 on
That's
the
right.
town side.
That's all. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Arthur.
You're welcome. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dennehy and Mr. Zulus, we want to be sure that people have a realistic understanding of areas that can be covered by the ARPA funding. And Mr. Dennehy, if we haven't done so yet, could we put that one page from the Norfolk County work that shows the 6 categories of funding up on the website so that people can see that and have an idea as to how to focus their thoughts rather than thinking something might be possible with ARPA funding that doesn't fit into any one of those 6 areas. I think that will help us and help them a lot.
Certainly, and I apologize. The storm today got in the way of a meeting that Rob Mallett and Karen and I were going to have so that I could introduce that tonight to everyone and then follow up tomorrow. So what will happen is on Friday at the Finance Committee meeting, I'll show the updated, or Rob or Karen will show the updated dashboard, and then we can bring that to this board and get that dashboard rolled out. It will contain those 6 categories. I think Arthur and Mike, you got a quick look at it. It's really dynamic. It's pretty impressive when you look at it. Fully transparent, and it basically it's an ARPA 101, if you will.
Thank you.
It's a good. Oh,
Mr. Zulus.
If I may, Madam Chair, it's a good point, Arthur and Mike, and maybe what we do is for the advertisement or the notice of this meeting, we just kind of put the, we're going to have a meeting to discuss and to get feedback on ARPA funding, and here's what you can, here are the categories, make it all part of the announcement, and then maybe that'll put people in a good position to give feedback.
Very good.
Okay. So why don't we ask Mr. Zulus and Mr. Dennehy to work on that notice that will go out tomorrow together, if they can.
I don't believe I volunteered, Madam Chair.
Well,
We can take care of it. We can take care of it.
It was a question.
I'm just kidding.
Okay, then I think we're finished with the finance report. If there's hear anything else, so we are now on to, let's see, item 15. We've already voted on Monday. I'm sorry. We had meeting minutes as number 12. I suggest we defer the October 13th meeting minutes. I think our new executive assistant, Linda Napoli, is off to a great start. She circulated a draft of the minutes last week. I only had a chance to take a very quick look at them, and I thought It was a really good effort. There may be a couple things that need to be tweaked, but I thought it was a great effort, but I haven't, they were not included in what you sent over today, and I didn't go dig them out from last week. So I don't know if anyone else has already read them or sent her any comments, but if we could put those off until the next meeting, I think that would be helpful. To me anyway. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, item 16 is the town administrator's report. Mr. Dennehy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Only one item tonight is obviously the storm that took place in New England or Massachusetts, and exclusively South Shore and Milton for that matter. So I want to thank all of our public safety employees, especially our DPW folks, and obviously our police and fire and Fallon ambulance. It was a very long day for them. Most of them didn't go home last night. There was a crew that stayed on. There was stuff happening while we were sleeping. Most people, like myself, were awoken at 4 a.m. when the wind really started kicking up. But, you know, there were over 1,700 customers in Milton, which is approximately 20% of the customers for Eversource that were without power at the peak around 11 o'clock this morning. So I want to thank our partners at Eversource. They're out there tonight. Those of you that may have driven around or may have experienced it, there were some very large trees that did some damage to a lot of wires in town and property. To my knowledge, there was no one injured, which is most important. We can always fix these things and get back to normal. So as of the last half hour, there's currently 625 customers still without power. There's different pockets of town that are affected. I just got a text from a friend on Center Lane who's still without power. I think Mr. Wells got a text that Glover School is still without power. So know that Eversource, who had a tough time getting buckets up in the air because the wind continued to sustain over 35 miles an hour throughout the midday, is working fervently now to try to get power back restored to those in Milton and the entire South Shore and Cape Cod for that matter. So Milton, you know, we suffered some pretty bad damage, not nearly what you probably saw on the Cape and parts further south on Route 3, Marshfield, Cohasset, and Situate, places like that. But I really want to thank everybody that's been working diligently all day, and know that it's probably going to take a good week for us to clean up the town. There's debris everywhere, and with all the leaves that were on the tree, they did some of us a favor. But yeah, that's all I have for tonight.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dennehy. I do not have a report this evening. Do any members have reports? Mr. Doyle? Okay. Mr. Zulus?
No report, Madam Chair.
Ms. Collins?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Wells?
No, Madam Chair, just to echo the comments of Mr. Dennehy regarding today's operations. I was up early out and they did a great job. Not an easy day.
Yes, agreed. Public comment response, we've really already taken that item. I don't think there's anything else to add. Has anyone had anything? Future agenda items. I'm hoping that we might be able to do some of the housekeeping items by late November, early December. Like, I thought maybe we could try to get some of the policies back on track to be adopted, but that depends on the policy committee having a meeting. It would be nice if we could do the second reading on some of those. Anyone has any other future agenda items, just let the town administrator know and we'll get them on an agenda. Community happenings.
Madam Chair, I think,
Yes.
do we have the Halloween stroll on the square this weekend, I believe? Am I correct, Mr. Dennehy?
Yes.
We do. Yeah, there was a notice that came out from the Chamber of Commerce this afternoon or this evening. There is more rain coming on Saturday, so they're not going to make a decision until Friday. So TBD.
As well as a road race? We have a road race this weekend as well?
There is a road race, yes.
What was the date of the Monster Dash? I should look that up beforehand. Is that this weekend?
It's on Sunday, yeah, it's on the day.
Okay, hopefully the community will enjoy those two events. I may have said it at the beginning, but we do not have an executive session this evening, so item 22 is deferred. We're at the end of the agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, Mr. Doyle?
Yes. Who wants to stay?
Mr. Zulus,
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Bowles.
Yes, I'm getting one of those headphones, Michael. Anyone notice the
You know
difference
what?
in the quality of his? Yeah, but you don't notice the difference in the quality of your, it's different from all of us.
Was it
It's
better?
It's TV quality when you speak, yeah.
Really?
Totally different, yeah.
Oh,
think so.
I just did it because my speakers didn't seem to be working, so that's why I did it. But
Yeah.
okay.
And myself.
Sound
yeah.
like Fred Cusick and Johnny Pearson from
He does.
1980.
Really, I was having headset envy. I was wondering who makes those because I don't have a good pair like that.
We could all use those on Monday night.
I have the headset. I don't have the mouthpiece to mine.
Yeah,
I have the booth, but I don't have the
that's
mouthpiece.
great.
All right, thanks.
One time late in Fred Cusick's career, I actually saw him at a game. And, you know, he was carrying a little stool. He and Johnny Pearson were walking out and they were carrying a little stool. And it was a brush with greatness. My friends and I said, "Hey, Fred, how you doing?" And he said, "Hey, guys."
There you go.
Brush with greatness.
All right, thank
All
you,
right.
everyone.
Good night, Madam Chair.
Good night,
everyone.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Sean.